The moment the fabric ripped, every conversation in that ballroom stopped cold. Not gradually, not politely, stopped. Victoria Sterling grabbed the back of Amara Brooks' gown with both hands and pulled, hard, deliberate, the kind of cruelty that takes actual planning. And the sound of tearing silk cut through 300 conversations like a blade through smoke. Amara froze. The cameras started flashing before she could even turn around. "You should have learned your place," Victoria said, loud enough for the front tables to hear, loud enough to make sure there was no confusion about what was happening, before stepping into this room. If you've ever stood somewhere and felt the ground disappear beneath you, not fall, just vanish, then you already know what Amara felt in that moment. And if you've never felt that, pray you never do. If that were you standing there, what would you have done? Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because the stories we tell on this channel are the ones people are still thinking about 3 days later. Hit the like button if you believe kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. And drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that ballroom, because what happened next changed every single person in that room. Every single one. The invitation had arrived 6 weeks earlier in a cream envelope with gold embossing, addressed to Ms. Amara Brooks in handwriting that was clearly done by a professional calligrapher, someone paid specifically to make people feel important before they even opened the thing. Amara had turned it over in her hands 3 times before setting it on her kitchen counter beside a half-eaten apple and a stack of student essays she still needed to grade. She almost threw it away. That was the thing about Amara Brooks that most people never understood, and the thing that would later make headlines across the entire country. She genuinely did not want to be seen. Not because she was ashamed of herself, not because she lacked confidence, but because she had spent 34 years learning that the world had very specific ideas about what a woman who looked like her was supposed to want. And most of those ideas involved being loud about it, performing her worth, justifying her presence. She was tired of that performance. She had been tired of it since she was 9 years old, and a substitute teacher told her she needed to tone it down for simply answering questions correctly. The invitation was from Marcus Sterling. The Marcus Sterling, founder of Sterling Capital Group, the man whose name appeared on 3 buildings in Manhattan and whose annual gala was the single most exclusive event in New York's social calendar. Amara knew who he was. Everyone knew who he was. She had no idea why his office had sent her an invitation. She texted her sister Janelle about it that evening. "They probably got the wrong address," Janelle wrote back immediately. "That's what I thought too. But you're going, right?" Amara stared at her phone for a long moment. "I don't know." Amara Denise Brooks. "If you throw that invitation away, I will never forgive you." She didn't throw it away. But she also didn't call anyone for advice about what to wear, or which shoes, or how to do her hair. She just picked the nicest dress she owned, a deep burgundy gown she'd bought on sale 2 years ago for a friend's wedding, and told herself that whatever happened, she would leave by 10 o'clock and be home with her tea by 10:30. She was not home by 10:30. The Meridian Hotel's grand ballroom was the kind of room that made you feel smaller the second you walked into it. Not because the people were unkind, not immediately, but because the architecture itself was designed to communicate hierarchy. The ceilings were 4 stories high. The chandeliers cost more than most people's houses. The flower arrangements on each table were taller than Amara's head, and she was 5'7". She checked her coat and stood in the entrance for a moment, taking it in. Around her, the women wore gowns that cost between $5,000 and $50,000. The men wore suits so precisely tailored they barely moved when the men inside them breathed. Champagne moved through the crowd on silver trays carried by servers who had clearly been selected for their ability to be invisible. Amara felt the first prickle of self-consciousness and made a decision. She was not going to spend the evening feeling like an apology. She straightened her back, accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. She didn't drink, something she would never explain to strangers, and walked into the room like she had somewhere specific to be. She didn't, actually. She barely knew anyone there, but she had learned young that the way you carry uncertainty tells people more about you than almost anything else. She found a seat at a side table near the back of the room, next to an older woman named Patricia, who turned out to be a retired federal judge and who spent the first 20 minutes of their conversation complaining about the canapes. Amara liked her immediately. They talked about education reform and the frustrating bureaucracy of public school funding, and Amara forgot, briefly, that she was wearing a 2-year-old dress from a sale rack, while everyone around her was draped in this season's couture. It was the most comfortable she felt all night. It didn't last. Victoria Sterling moved through a room the way a weather system moves through a town. Not quickly, but with the kind of inevitability that makes you want to get inside before it arrives. She was 26, beautiful in the way that comes from a lifetime of being told you're beautiful, and she had her father's bone structure and none of his restraint. She had been drinking since 7 o'clock, which was not unusual for her at these events, and she was in the particular mood that the third glass of champagne gave her, the mood where her observations about people felt like wit and her cruelty felt like honesty. She noticed Amara from across the room. This was also not unusual. Victoria Sterling noticed women she didn't recognize with the specific attention of someone cataloging threats. Not because Amara did anything threatening, she was sitting calmly, talking to Patricia, not looking at anyone in particular. But Victoria had a radar for women who seemed unbothered, and unbothered women irritated her in a way she had never examined closely enough to understand. "Who is that?" she asked her friend Cassandra, nodding in Amara's direction. Cassandra shrugged. "No idea. She came alone, I think." "She came alone." Victoria repeated it like it confirmed something. "To my father's gala." Victoria, no, I'm just saying." She took another sip. "It's a little presumptuous, don't you think? These events aren't exactly open to the public." She crossed the room. The first thing Victoria said to Amara was not cruel. This was important because it established the pattern. The way cruelty of Victoria's particular variety always began with something that sounded almost like polite curiosity before it became something else. "I don't think we've met," Victoria said, stopping beside the table. She didn't look at Patricia. She was looking at Amara the way someone looks at an object they're trying to price. Amara looked up. "I don't think we have. I'm Amara." Victoria tilted her head. "And how do you know my father?" "I'm not sure I do, actually. I received an invitation." "You received an invitation?" Victoria smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "From who?" "From his office." Amara kept her voice even. She had met Victoria Sterling's before, not this one specifically, but this type. She knew the architecture of what was being built here. "I assumed it was a mistake at first, but it had my name on it." Victoria looked her up and down slowly. The way she did it was not subtle. It was designed not to be. "That dress," she said finally. "Yes?" "It's very brave of you." The pause before brave was surgical. Not everyone can pull off that silhouette. Patricia beside Amara went very still. Amara said quietly, "Thank you." She turned back to Patricia, continued their conversation, gave Victoria nothing more. This was the wrong move, not morally wrong. It was exactly the right move, the dignified move, the move that any therapist would have applauded. But it was wrong in the sense that it lit something in Victoria Sterling that cheaper fuel couldn't have reached. Being dismissed by someone she'd dismissed first was a specific kind of outrage she didn't know how to metabolize. 15 minutes later, Amara excused herself from the table to find the restroom. She was crossing the floor, not rushing, just walking, navigating the space between tables with the careful courtesy of someone who didn't want to bump into anyone's chair. When she felt it. The grab came from behind, both hands, fingers twisted into the fabric at the back of her dress. And then the pull. Sharp, mean, decisive. The sound of tearing silk was very loud in a room that had briefly quieted between songs. Amara stumbled forward, caught herself on the back of an empty chair. Her hand gripped the wood hard enough that her knuckles ached. Behind her, she heard laughter. Victoria's laughter, and then Cassandra's, and then a few others she couldn't identify. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Victoria said, and her voice was thick with the particular satisfaction of someone who has done something they planned. "I must have caught it by accident. These big skirts can be so dangerous in a crowd, can't they?" Amara straightened. She could feel the draft where the fabric had given way at the back. She could feel the heat of 300 pairs of eyes that had turned in her direction. She could feel the cameras, phone cameras, the photographer near the stage, all of them pointing at her. She did not cry. This was not because she wasn't feeling anything. She was feeling everything. Her face was hot. Her chest felt like someone had reached inside it and squeezed. The part of her that was 9 years old and sitting in a substitute teacher's classroom was screaming. But she had learned, through years of being a body in spaces not designed for her, of being a black woman in rooms where the default was not her. The tears gave certain people exactly what they were looking for. And she refused to give Victoria Sterling that. She kept her face still. She reached back carefully, assessed the damage with her fingers without looking, and pulled the torn fabric together as best she could, holding it with one hand. The room had not started talking again. This was perhaps the cruelest part. The silence that a room full of powerful people produced when they decided, collectively, that intervening would cost them something. Executives who built careers on integrity sat at their tables and did not move. Women who wrote checks to women's charities looked down at their plates. Marcus Sterling himself, the man whose name was on the building, whose daughter had just publicly humiliated a guest at his event, sat at the head table and said nothing because Victoria was the only daughter he had, and he had spent 26 years choosing the path of least resistance with her and calling it love. Victoria walked around to face Amara. She was smiling now with her whole face, the champagne having finished the job it had started earlier. "You know," she said, and her voice carried in the silence in a way she clearly intended, "I've been trying to figure out all evening what you're doing here, and I think I finally understand." She glanced around the room, inviting the audience in. "You're here because someone felt sorry for you. And honestly, looking at you right now, I understand why." She let her eyes travel down Amara's body with open, deliberate contempt. "Women like you, and I want to be clear about what I mean when I say like you, don't belong in rooms like this. Not because of anything personal, just because, well," she gestured vaguely. "Look at you." Somewhere in the back of the room, a woman made a soft sound of distress. No one moved. Amara looked at Victoria Sterling. She looked at her for a long, quiet moment, long enough that Victoria's smile flickered once before reasserting itself. "Are you finished?" Amara asked. It was 3 words, simple, quiet, no heat in them. Victoria blinked. "Excuse me?" "I asked if you were finished." Amara's voice was steady. Not because she wasn't shaking inside, she absolutely was. Her legs felt like water, and her heart was hammering. But because she had made a decision somewhere in the last 30 seconds to not let this woman see the damage she was doing. "Because if you are, I'd like to get back to my conversation." Victoria stared at her, and then, because she had never in her life not gotten the last word, she said something that would be repeated in screenshots and news articles and television segments for the next 6 months. "You should have learned your place before stepping into this room." What happened in the next 4 minutes would later be described differently by different people who were present. Some would say the room felt like it was holding its breath. Some would say it was the worst thing they'd ever witnessed at a public event. Patricia, the retired federal judge, would tell her daughter later that night that she had been so ashamed of herself for sitting there that she couldn't sleep. What everyone agreed on was this. Amara Brooks stood in the middle of that ballroom, holding the torn back of her dress together with one hand, and did not break. She did not cry, did not shout, did not say anything more. She just stood there with a quiet dignity that, somehow, made Victoria look smaller than she had before she opened her mouth. And then, from outside the hotel, came the sound of vehicles. Not one vehicle, multiple. The kind of quiet, coordinated arrival that spoke of logistics, of planning, of resources deployed with precision. The sound traveled through the walls and into the ballroom like a low hum, and the security personnel near the entrance, the serious ones, the ones who moved differently from the hotel staff, straightened. One of them put his hand to his earpiece. His face changed. He turned and said something quietly to the man beside him, and that man's face changed too. The whisper started at the door and moved through the room in the 10 seconds before it opened. The strange, instinctive communication of a crowd that senses something before it can name what. And then the doors to the ballroom opened, and the man who walked through them was the reason every business deal in that room had just become uncertain, every alliance suddenly worth reconsidering, every calculation that powerful people had spent years building quietly, recalibrating itself in the span of a single breath. Amara was still standing in the middle of the floor when the room went completely, absolutely, utterly silent. She hadn't heard his name yet. She didn't know he was there. She just heard the silence. A new kind of silence, different from the one that had followed her humiliation. And she looked up. And across the ballroom, through 300 people who had suddenly become very interested in being very still, a pair of dark eyes found her. Found the torn dress. Found her hand holding the fabric together. Found her face, which was still composed, still dignified, still refusing to break. And something in those dark eyes shifted. Something that had been controlled became very, very quiet. The kind of quiet that people who knew Lucien Moretti recognized immediately as the most dangerous thing he ever became. The man beside Amara, a young executive who had been carefully not watching her humiliation for the past several minutes, took one look at the man standing in the entrance of the ballroom and took 3 steps backward without appearing to consciously decide to do so. Everyone in the room who recognized the name Moretti made a similar small movement, not dramatic, just the body's instinctive calculation of distance. Because the man walking across the ballroom floor was not walking quickly. He was not storming, not charging, not demonstrating anything for anyone's benefit. I was simply walking, steady, purposeful, unhurried, and the crowd parted in front of him the way water moves away from something that has decided it's going through. Amara watched him come toward her and didn't understand what was happening. Not yet. She would understand soon, and when she did, every answer she'd been holding together with both hands, including the torn piece of her dress, including the dignity she'd been white-knuckling for the last 10 minutes, including the composure she'd built specifically to deny Victoria Sterling the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart, was going to mean something completely different than it had 5 minutes ago. I was 15 feet away from her when she finally said his name under her breath, just to herself, just to confirm what her eyes were telling her. And his name, in that ballroom, was the beginning of everything Victoria Sterling was about to lose. I was 12 feet away when Amara finally let herself believe it was real. Lucien. Not a man who looked like him, not someone she was confusing with him in the low golden light of a ballroom that had been designed to make everything look more important than it was. It was him. The particular way he moved, the particular set of his shoulders, the way he occupied space without performing the occupation of it. She had spent 18 months learning the specific grammar of that man's body, and you don't forget a grammar you've studied that closely. He was looking at her the way he always looked at her when he walked into a room and found her before she found him, with that quiet, private relief that he never talked about, but that she'd learned to read in the 3 seconds before his face settled into whatever expression the room required. Except tonight, those 3 seconds didn't happen. His face didn't settle. It didn't move toward any expression she recognized as public. It went somewhere else entirely, somewhere still and cold and deeply, carefully controlled. And she knew from 18 months of knowing him that the stillness was not peace. The stillness was the thing that came before. He reached her. He didn't say anything, not yet. He looked at her face first, checked it the way you check someone you love for damage after something you can't undo has already happened. And then his eyes moved down to her hand, the one holding the torn fabric together at her back, and the muscles along his jaw went tight in a way that was almost invisible unless you knew where to look. She knew where to look. He shrugged off his jacket in one motion. No ceremony, no announcement. He stepped behind her, settled the jacket around her shoulders himself, and when his hands came around to the front to make sure it was covering her, he held the lapels for exactly 1 second longer than necessary. She felt his breath near her ear. "I've got you," he said, so quiet that she was certain later she was the only one who heard it. Then he straightened, stepped beside her, took her hand, the one that wasn't holding his jacket closed, and held it in both of his. And then, for the first time since he walked through the door, he looked at the rest of the room. Victoria Sterling had not moved. This was, objectively, a mistake. Every self-preservation instinct a person possessed should have been screaming at her to put distance between herself and whatever was unfolding in the center of that ballroom floor. Several people around her had already taken quiet, strategic steps backward. Cassandra had retreated completely, finding sudden and urgent interest in something happening near the bar. But Victoria had grown up in rooms where the temperature changed around her. She was the weather. Other people felt it. And the part of her brain that champagne had been quietly dismantling for the past 3 hours had not yet transmitted the message that the weather in this room was no longer hers. She was still holding her champagne glass. She was still smiling, though the smile had gone slightly uncertain at the edges. She looked at the man standing next to Amara. She looked at his face, which was pointed at her now, and she felt the first real thing she had felt in the past hour that wasn't alcohol or adrenaline or the specific pleasure of cruelty enjoyed in company. She felt afraid. She didn't know why yet. She didn't know who he was, not immediately, not with certainty. Her father's galas drew powerful men the way sugar drew things with wings. And this man was clearly powerful, clearly connected given the way the room had rearranged itself around his entrance. But Victoria had been around powerful men her entire life, and had never once found them frightening. This was different. This was the kind of stillness that didn't need to threaten you. It just was, and you understood from some very old part of your nervous system that you were in the presence of something that operated by different rules than the ones you'd always assumed were universal. Victoria. The voice came from behind her. Her father. She turned. Marcus Sterling had left the head table. She hadn't seen him move, and he was crossing the floor toward her with an expression she had never seen on his face in 26 years. Not anger, not frustration, not the particular tired disappointment he'd been showing her since she was 16. Fear. He was afraid. "Come here," he said, low and tight. "Papa, I was just... Come here." He took her arm, not roughly, but firmly, in a way that communicated this was not a request she had the option of declining. He pulled her close and bent his head toward hers, and what he said into her ear made the blood leave her face in a process she could almost feel happening, like a tide going out fast. "That man," Marcus Sterling said, "is Lucien Moretti." The name spread through the room the way names like that always do, not spoken aloud, not announced, but transmitted through the particular body language of people who have heard something that rewrites everything they thought they understood about the last 20 minutes. Lucien Moretti. The Moretti name was not new to any serious businessman in New York. You didn't work at the level these people worked without understanding the geography of the city. And the geography of the city included the Moretti family, the way it included the subway system. Invisible to people who didn't need to think about it, absolutely foundational to everyone who did. His grandfather had built the foundation. His father had expanded it. Lucien had inherited it at 22 when his father died under circumstances that 3 separate federal investigations had failed to conclusively explain. And in the 14 years since, he had become something his predecessors hadn't managed to be. Untouchable. Not because he was violent, though the people who needed to know that about him knew it, but because he had learned, early, and with the particular intensity of a young man who had to learn everything the hard way, how to make himself necessary, how to build relationships that weren't leverage so much as genuine architecture, the kind that held buildings up, that you couldn't remove without collapsing everything around it. Half the businesses in this ballroom had some connection to Moretti interests. Not all of them knew it. Some of them had known it for years and slept fine because the connections were legitimate, because Lucien ran legitimate operations alongside everything else, because the man was genuinely, infuriatingly intelligent in ways that made you want to work with him even if the alternative versions of him frightened you. Every person in that room was now doing a very fast calculation. The woman he had just wrapped his jacket around. The woman Victoria Sterling had just publicly humiliated in front of 300 people. The woman she had torn the dress off and called fat and worthless and out of place. That woman was here with Lucien Moretti. He's here for her? Cassandra's voice was barely above a whisper, not meant to travel, but the room was so quiet it traveled anyway. No one answered her. No one needed to. Lucien's attention moved through the room with the slow, systematic quality of someone taking inventory rather than looking for anything specific. He wasn't performing menace. He wasn't trying to communicate anything. He was simply looking at the room with clear eyes and arriving at conclusions. And the room understood this and found it deeply, specifically uncomfortable in the way that honest assessment always makes dishonest people uncomfortable. His eyes stopped on Marcus Sterling. Marcus was still holding Victoria's arm. He had gone pale. Not dramatically, not the pale of someone about to faint, but the pale of someone who has just understood the full scope of a problem he cannot delegate away. He held Lucien's gaze for a moment and then looked away, which was itself a communication. Lucien looked back at Amara. "Tell me what happened," he said. Still quiet. Still just for her. She shook her head once. "Not here." "Amara." "Not here." She said it with a firmness that surprised her even as she said it, and she felt his hand tighten slightly around hers. Not in frustration, she knew him well enough to read the difference. In something closer to respect. He understood what she was doing. He wasn't sure he agreed with it, but he understood it. He nodded. One short movement, and then Victoria Sterling, who had been standing 12 feet away watching this exchange with an expression that had traveled the full distance from arrogance to terror in the span of about 4 minutes, made her second mistake of the evening. "I don't understand what the problem is," she said. The words came out louder than she intended. Champagne and the lifelong habit of filling silence, because silence had always been something other people felt but never her. These things combined in her chest and pushed the words out before the smarter part of her could stop them. Everyone in the room turned to look at her. "I mean," she continued, and her voice had a brittle, defensive quality now, the quality of someone who knows they've walked out onto ice and can't figure out which direction leads back to solid ground. "It was an accident. The dress caught. It happens." Lucien looked at her. He didn't say anything. This was, Victoria would think later, much later, in the kind of dark, honest hours that follow public disasters. Worse than anything he could have said. Because what he said to her was nothing, and what his face said to her was that she wasn't worth the words. That she was a problem that had already been solved in his mind and was now simply in the process of being filed. "Victoria," Marcus Sterling's voice was very controlled. "Stop talking." "Papa, I'm just saying Stop talking." She stopped. The silence reasserted itself. It had a different texture now than the silence that had followed Amara's humiliation. That silence had been the silence of complicity, of 300 people deciding not to intervene. This silence was something else. The silence of a room holding itself very still around something it didn't want to disturb. Marcus Sterling let go of his daughter's arm and walked toward Lucien. He was 63 years old and had built a business empire from a starting capital of $50,000 and 20 years of brutal work. He was not, by any measure, a cowardly man. But watching him walk across that ballroom floor was like watching someone walk toward a conversation they knew they couldn't win and had decided to face anyway, out of a sense of obligation rather than optimism. He stopped a few feet away, extended his hand. "Lucien," he said, "I had no idea you were coming tonight." Lucien looked at the extended hand, looked at Marcus, did not take the hand. "I know," he said. "I didn't send notice." Marcus lowered his hand slowly. "What happened tonight with Ms. Brooks? I want you to know that it's completely unacceptable, and I intend—" "What's her name?" Lucien's voice was even. "The woman who did this." Marcus closed his eyes for a half-second. "That's my daughter, Victoria. I know who she is. I'm asking you to say her name, for the record." The room heard this. The room understood without being told what "for the record" meant from a man like Lucien Moretti. "Victoria Sterling," Marcus said. Lucien nodded. "And what are you going to do about it, Marcus?" The use of the first name landed with specific weight, not friendly familiarity. The familiarity of someone who has decided formal address is a courtesy they don't owe you anymore. Marcus Sterling straightened. "I intend to make this right. To Ms. Brooks, and to you, and to everyone in this room who witnessed—" "I'm not asking about me," Lucien said. "I'm asking about her." He meant Amara. He didn't gesture. He didn't need to. "What are you going to do about what happened to her?" Marcus looked at Amara. She was standing very still, her hand still in Lucien's, his jacket around her shoulders, her expression composed in a way that Marcus recognized in hindsight as the specific composure of someone who has been holding something difficult for too long and is doing it on willpower alone. He turned back to Lucien and said, with the gravity of a man who understood the accounting of what was being asked, "Whatever she asks." Amara didn't ask for anything yet. She was thinking. This was a thing about Amara Brooks that people who loved her found maddening, and people who knew her well found reassuring. In the moments when most people reacted, she went quiet. Not cold, not withdrawn, just internal. She was running through something, working something out, and the people who needed a reaction from her in those moments rarely got one until she was finished. Lucien knew this. He'd stood in that particular waiting space with her enough times to have stopped fighting it. What she was thinking about was Victoria. Not about what to do to her, not about revenge or consequence, or the very satisfying mental image of watching arrogance get its accounting. She was thinking about the specific mechanics of Victoria's cruelty, the way it had been so confident, so public, so completely convinced of its own justification. She was thinking about the champagne glass still in Victoria's hand. She was thinking about Marcus Sterling's face when he'd said, "That's my daughter," and the way love and horror could apparently occupy the same expression in a person. She was thinking about Patricia, the retired federal judge, who had stayed very still at her table through all of this, whose stillness Amara had registered in her peripheral vision but had not yet had time to fully process. She was thinking about the cameras, all those phone cameras that had been pointed at her when her dress tore, all those photos that were right now making their way from private phones to group chats to social media platforms in a process that was already unstoppable. She was thinking about what it meant that Lucien was here and what it meant that he'd come without telling her, and what it meant that she was going to have to decide in the next few minutes what she wanted from this room. Amara. His voice was low, meant only for her. She looked at him. "Tell me what you need," he said. And she said, because it was the only true thing she could find right then, "I need a minute." He nodded. Then he looked up at Marcus Sterling and said, "Get her somewhere to sit, somewhere private." Marcus Sterling moved immediately. A man who had run corporations for 30 years, who gave orders as naturally as breathing, responded to Lucien Moretti's instruction with the speed of someone who had very quickly recalibrated the hierarchy of the room. They put her in a small anteroom off the main corridor, a hosting room, comfortable, with a couch and a mirror and a small table with water and fruit that no one had touched. Marcus Sterling hovered in the doorway until Lucien looked at him once, and then he stepped back and closed the door from the outside. Lucien stood in the middle of the room. He wasn't pacing. He was doing the thing he did when he was containing something, standing completely still and letting the stillness do the work. Amara sat on the couch. She let go of his jacket. It fell open slightly, and she looked down at her dress, at the tiare, at the fabric she'd been clutching for the past 20 minutes, and she felt something shift in her chest, something that had been wired very tight, very carefully, since the moment Victoria's hands had grabbed her from behind. "She planned it," Amara said. "It wasn't an accident, the way she grabbed the fabric, both hands, from behind. You don't do that by accident." Lucien was quiet. "She wanted an audience," Amara continued. "She waited until there were enough people watching. She timed it." "I know." "How do you know?" "Because I've been in rooms with people like that my whole life." He finally moved, sat down on the couch beside her, not close enough to crowd her, exactly the right distance. "They always time it." Amara looked at her hands. "Nobody did anything." "I know." 300 people. Her voice was steady. The steadiness cost something. He could see it, but she was paying it. "There were senators in that room, Lucien. There were—" She stopped. "I know," he said again. Not platitude, just acknowledgement. She looked at him then, turned and looked at him fully, the way she did when she was about to say something she'd been deciding whether to say. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "What do you want me to do?" She made a small, frustrated sound. "Don't do that. Don't ask me what I want and then do whatever you were going to do anyway." He didn't deny it. This was one of the things she'd learned about him in 18 months. He didn't deny things that were true. It was one of the things that had made her trust him, and one of the things that sometimes frightened her. "I'm going to end every business relationship I have with Marcus Sterling's family," he said. "That's already decided. That's not about tonight. That's accountability. A man who lets his daughter behave like that in public and does nothing until the cost becomes personal isn't a man I want to do business with. That'll destroy him." "Yes." "Lucien, Amara." He turned to look at her fully now, the same way she'd turned to him. "A woman I love was humiliated in front of 300 people. Her dress was torn off her body in public. She stood there for 20 minutes and not one person moved. The host of the event sat at his table and did nothing until I walked through the door. You want me to feel conflicted about the consequence? I don't. I'm not going to perform that for you." She held his gaze. "And Victoria?" Something moved in his expression, not softening, exactly, more like recalibration. "What do you want there?" "I want to go back out there," she said. He went still. "Amara, I want to go back out there," she repeated. "I want to sit at that table with Patricia. I want to finish my water, and I want to leave when I'm ready to leave, not because I was driven out." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're not going back out there alone," he said finally. "I know." She met his eyes. "I'm not asking you to let me go alone." When the door to the anteroom opened again, Marcus Sterling was waiting in the corridor. and he was not alone. Beside him stood a woman Amara didn't recognize, older, somewhere in her 50s, with the particular posture of someone who managed things professionally, who had managed this specific type of thing before. "Ms. Brooks," the woman said, "I'm Eleanor Vance, head of operations for Sterling Capital. I want to express—" "Where's Victoria?" Lucien's voice cut across whatever Eleanor Vance had been preparing to say. Marcus Sterling straightened. "She's still in the ballroom. I thought it was better to—" "Go back inside," Lucien said to Marcus. "Wait at your table. I'll come find you." Marcus blinked. The instruction was so simply stated, so entirely absent of the kind of contextual niceties that usually wrap directives between powerful men, that it took him a moment to process it as an instruction rather than an observation. Then he turned and went back inside. Eleanor Vance looked at Lucien and made the immediate and correct calculation that she should also not be in this hallway, and followed Marcus. Amara watched them go. She looked down at herself. Lucien's jacket still around her shoulders, the tear in her dress invisible now but not forgotten, her shoes that she'd been standing in for 3 hours that were starting to make themselves noticed. "Ready?" Lucien asked. She breathed in, breathed out. "No," she said honestly. "But let's go anyway." He almost smiled. Not quite. Not in the corridor of the Meridian Hotel, with everything that was waiting for them on the other side of those ballroom doors. But almost. He offered her his arm the way he'd offered it 100 times in private spaces where no one was watching, where the gesture was just a gesture, not a statement. Tonight it was both. She took it. The ballroom noticed their return before they were fully through the door. It happened the way awareness spread in crowds. The people nearest the door turned first, and then the people next to them registered the shift in attention, and the ripple went outward through the tables until even the people at the far end of the room had turned in their chairs. The room they walked back into was not the same room Amara had been humiliated in 25 minutes ago. The geography was identical, same tables, same chandeliers, same flower arrangements, but the power distribution had reorganized itself entirely around the man at Amara's side, and everyone in it was feeling the particular discomfort of having their choices reviewed. Victoria was standing near the bar. She had acquired a new glass of champagne at some point during the interval, which was either defiant or desperate or both, and she was flanked by Cassandra and a young man in a gray suit who Amara didn't recognize. She looked across the room at Amara and Lucien, and the champagne glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Amara walked to her table, the table where Patricia was still sitting, where the retired federal judge had not moved, had not gone anywhere, had apparently decided that her presence at that table was the only small thing she could do and had committed to it with the tenacity of someone paying a debt. "You came back," Patricia said. Her voice was rough. "I came back," Amara said, and sat down. Lucien stood beside the table. He didn't sit. He wasn't there to sit and have dinner. I was there because Amara had asked him to be there, and he had chosen, for now, to let that be the operating principle of the next few minutes. Even though his eyes kept moving to Victoria at the bar, kept performing that same quiet, systematic inventory of the room he'd done when he walked in, kept arriving at the same conclusions. "Your father is a careful man," Patricia said, looking up at Lucien. She had the directness of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms. "He was," Lucien said. "I learned different things." Patricia looked at him, then at Amara, then back at the room that was still, in a collective, unspoken way, waiting for something. "Well," she said, "someone ought to say something." "Someone will," Amara said. She was looking at the head table, at Marcus Sterling, who had returned to his seat as instructed, and was sitting there with the expression of a man who has just understood, fully, the invoice for 26 years of choosing the easy response to his daughter's worst impulses. He stood up. Not because anyone told him to stand up right then. Lucien hadn't signaled him. Amara hadn't looked at him. He stood up because he had apparently arrived, sitting at his own table at his own event, at the conclusion that he had been waiting his entire adult life to be forced to. The room shifted again, everyone turning. The microphone at the podium was live, so they were between program segments, and Marcus Sterling walked toward it with the measured pace of a man who has decided to face the accounting rather than defer it again. Victoria watched her father cross to the podium. The champagne glass went down on the bar behind her without her seeming to notice she'd set it down. I need to say something, Marcus Sterling said into the microphone. His voice was even, professional. He'd given thousands of speeches. But there was something underneath the evenness that the microphone caught, and the room heard. Something that should have been said 30 minutes ago, and wasn't, because I failed to say it. That failure is mine, and I'm not interested in explaining it away. The room was absolutely silent. A guest at this event, my event, in my room, under my hospitality, was treated in a way that was cruel, public, and wrong. And the people in this room, including me, let it happen. He paused. That's not something I can undo. But I want Ms. Amara Brooks to know, in front of every person here, that what happened to her was wrong. That she had every right to be in this room. That she has more right to be in this room than anyone who stayed silent while she was humiliated. Amara was very still. Beside her, Lucien had gone still too, but differently, with something that wasn't quite surprise, wasn't quite approval. Something that was waiting to see if this meant what it might mean, or if it was the performance of accountability rather than the real thing. Victoria made a sound, not words, just a sound, a sharp, involuntary inhale. Her father had not looked at her since he walked to the podium. I also need to say, Marcus Sterling continued, and his voice changed slightly here, moved out of the register of public apology into something more difficult and more personal, that my daughter, Victoria, will be leaving this event tonight, and that what she did reflects choices I allowed by not addressing them when they were smaller. That's also mine to own. He stepped back from the microphone. He still hadn't looked at Victoria. The room didn't applaud. That would have been wrong, and whatever else this crowd was, they were sophisticated enough to understand that applause for a man acknowledging his own failures was a different thing than applause for an achievement. Instead, there was something more uncomfortable and more honest. Silence, and then the slow return of conversation. And underneath both of those things, the particular atmosphere of a room full of people sitting with their own inventory. Victoria set her champagne glass down and walked out of the ballroom without speaking to anyone. She did not look at Amara. She did not look at Lucien. She walked through the main doors with the rigid posture of someone holding themselves together through sheer force of stubbornness, and the doors closed behind her, and the event continued around her absence like water closing over a stone. But Lucien was still standing beside Amara's table, and the look on his face, the look that Amara could read in the way she'd learned to read all his looks, had not changed in the way she'd hoped it might change when Marcus Sterling spoke. It had not softened. It had not arrived at resolution. She looked up at him. He was watching the door through which Victoria had exited. "Lucien," she said quietly. He looked down at her, and she saw it then, saw the thing that Marcus Sterling's speech had not addressed, and that Lucien's stillness had been holding with increasing difficulty for the past 40 minutes. This wasn't about Victoria anymore. This wasn't even about Marcus Sterling's business relationships or the accounting of power that Lucien had already decided on before he crossed the ballroom floor. This was about the 20 minutes. The 20 minutes during which Amara had stood in a torn dress in a room full of powerful people, and every single one of them had chosen not to act, and Lucien had not been there, and there was nothing he could do to retroactively change that, and that fact was sitting in him like a piece of glass. "Don't," she said. She said it very quietly, just for him. He looked at her. "Don't do what you're thinking about doing," she said. His jaw was tight. "You don't know what I'm thinking." "I know exactly what you're thinking." She held his gaze. "And I'm asking you not to." The silence between them lasted 4 seconds. She counted. She'd learned to count his silences, to understand the difference between the 4-second silence that ended in agreement and the 6-second silence that ended in something else entirely. It was 4 seconds. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat down, but his phone was already in his hand, and she watched him type something, watched his thumb move across the screen in 3 quick strokes. And she didn't ask him what he'd sent because she wasn't sure she wanted to know, and she had already spent everything she had on asking him for one thing tonight and couldn't spend any more right now. She reached over and put her hand over his phone. He looked up. "After," she said. "Whatever it is. After we leave." He looked at her hand on his phone, then at her face. "After," he agreed. But outside the Meridian Hotel, in the convoy of black vehicles still parked along the curb, a man named Caruso had already received a text message, had already read it twice, and had already begun making calls that would, before the night was over, permanently alter the landscape of what the Sterling family was permitted to do in this city. Amara didn't know about Caruso yet. She didn't know what Lucien had typed. She knew only that the man beside her had made her a promise, and that the promise was conditional, and that the condition was after they left, after she was somewhere safe and private, and not performing composure for 300 witnesses, and that whatever came after was already in motion in the world outside these doors. She looked across the ballroom, at Marcus Sterling, who had returned to his table and was sitting very still, at the empty place where Victoria had been standing, at Patricia beside her, who had said nothing in the last 5 minutes, but whose hand had, at some point Amara hadn't registered, come to rest quietly on the table between them. Not touching, not intrusive, just present. At the room full of people who had made a choice 40 minutes ago and were now sitting with the weight of it, and she thought, this is not over. Not because of Lucien, not because of the calls Caruso was making in a car she didn't know existed, not because of business consequences or power structures, or the geometry of whose name frightened whom. It wasn't over because she wasn't finished. She had walked back into this room. She had sat back down at this table. She had refused to let the last image of Amara Brooks in this ballroom be the image of a woman covering herself and walking away. But she also understood, sitting there with Lucien's jacket still around her shoulders and his phone under her hand and a retired federal judge sitting quietly beside her like an unlikely sentinel, that she had stepped onto a road tonight that didn't have a turnaround point. The photos were already out there. Victoria Sterling's words were already in the world, already traveling from phone to platform in the unstoppable way of things that are witnessed by enough people. And Lucien Moretti had walked into the Meridian Hotel ballroom, wrapped his jacket around a woman's shoulders in front of 300 people, and sat down at her table. There was no version of the next morning that looked like any morning that had come before it. Amara Brooks had come to this gala in a borrowed confidence dress from a sale rack 2 years ago, intending to leave by 10:30 with her tea and her privacy intact. That version of tonight was gone. What replaced it was still taking shape, somewhere out in the city, in Caruso's phone calls, in the photos already captioned and posted, in Marcus Sterling's very public apology and his daughter's very public exit, in Lucien's 4-second silence and what it had cost him. And Amara was sitting in the middle of it with the specific, clarifying feeling of a person who has just understood that the life they walked in with is not the life they're walking out with. She picked up her water glass. She drank. She set it down. "Patricia," she said. The retired federal judge looked at her. "Tell me something boring," Amara said. "About anything, just for a few minutes." Patricia looked at her for a moment with the eyes of someone who had seen many things in many courtrooms and understood precisely what was being asked and why. "The canapes," Patricia said, "are still terrible." Amara laughed. It was small and it was brief, and it cracked something open in her chest that had been sealed tight for the past hour. And Lucien looked at her when she laughed, looked at her with something that wasn't quite the expression he wore in public, or the expression he wore in private, but something between the two, something she had never seen on his face before and would spend a long time afterward trying to name. And outside the hotel, Caruso's calls continued, and the photos traveled, and the night moved toward whatever it had already decided to become. The laugh lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then Amara's phone lit up on the table in front of her, and the laugh stopped, and everything that had briefly loosened in her chest went tight again. She didn't recognize the number. She almost didn't answer it. But something, the specific quality of an unknown number calling at 11:14 on a Thursday night, in the middle of everything that was already in motion, made her pick it up. "Ms. Brooks?" The voice on the other end was female, professional, with the clipped efficiency of someone making a call they'd been instructed to make rather than a call they'd chosen. "My name is Dana Riles. I'm a producer with the Sentinel News Group. I'm calling because we have images from tonight's event at the Meridian Hotel that we intend to publish in our morning edition, and as a matter of journalistic practice, we'd like to give you the opportunity to comment before we go to print." Amara said nothing for a moment. "Ms. Brooks?" "What images?" she said. "Images from the incident involving Victoria Sterling, and images from the arrival of Lucien Moretti." A brief pause. "We also have a secondary source who has provided context about your relationship with Mr. Moretti that we intend to include in the piece." Amara's eyes moved to Lucien. He was watching her face. He had read something in the first 2 seconds of the call, the way she'd gone still, the way her jaw had shifted, and he was watching her now with the focused attention of someone who has already begun calculating without having the numbers yet. "What context?" Amara said. Not a question, a demand. "Ms. Brooks, I want to be transparent with you. The information we've been given indicates that your relationship with Mr. Moretti began under circumstances that your current employer, the Hargrove Academy, might find concerning. Specifically, that you were introduced through a contact with known ties to—" Amara hung up. She set the phone face down on the table. The table was very quiet. "Amara," Lucien's voice. She looked at him, and he saw it immediately. Whatever the call had contained, it wasn't just the photos. It wasn't just the story of tonight. Something in those 15 seconds had reached into a part of her that the torn dress and Victoria's cruelty and the weight of 300 silent witnesses had not reached. "Who is Caruso?" she asked. The silence that followed was 1 second long. She counted. 1 second. "He works for me," Lucien said. "I know he works for you. I saw you text someone when I had my hand on your phone." She kept her voice level. "I'm asking who he is." "He handles logistics." "What logistics?" Lucien looked at her steadily. "The kind that need to be handled at night." She held his gaze. "And how did a news producer at the Sentinel get a source tonight within the last hour? Who has information about how we met? Information specific enough to threaten my job?" The quality of Lucien's stillness changed. It was subtle. Someone who didn't know him would have seen nothing. But Amara knew him, had spent 18 months learning the specific vocabulary of his body, and what she saw in the quarter-second adjustment of his posture was not guilt. It wasn't guilt. But it was the thing that came before he said something he had not planned to say tonight. "I'm going to need you to tell me something right now," she said. "And I need you to tell me the truth, not the version you've decided I can handle." Patricia had gone very still beside her. Not listening, pointedly not listening, in the specific way of someone disciplined enough to give two people the privacy of pretending they're alone. "The person who gave them that information," Lucien said, "was not someone I sent. But it's someone you know." A pause. "Yes. Someone who knows how we met." "Yes." "Which means," Amara said, and her voice was still level, still even, and it cost her something she could feel in the back of her throat, "that someone in your circle decided tonight was the right time to use me as leverage against you. Or against me. Or both." Lucien said nothing, because she was right and he knew it, and lying to her was something he had never done and was not going to start doing in the ballroom of the Meridian Hotel at 11:15 on a Thursday night. Amara picked up her phone, turned it over, looked at the dark screen. "How bad is it?" she asked. "What they know?" "It depends on how they frame it." "Lucien." Her eyes came up. "How bad?" He held her gaze. "The introduction. The way we met. It was through Danny Reese, and Danny Reese has a federal file that's been public record for 2 years. If someone connects you to Danny and connects Danny to me and frames it the wrong way—" "The school," she said. "Yes." She breathed in slowly through her nose. "Hargrove is a private institution. They have a morality clause in my contract. A broad one." She paused. "I've read it 40 times because I always thought it was overreaching, and my department head told me not to worry about it. And I—" She stopped herself, pressed her lips together. "If they publish that I'm romantically involved with the head of a crime family, introduced through a federally investigated associate—" "You're not," Lucien said. His voice had gone very quiet. "Involved with the head of a crime family. You're involved with me. What I am is separate from—" "Is it?" The words came out fast, faster than she intended, and she heard the heat in them and didn't pull it back. "Is it separate, Lucien? Because from where I'm sitting, a journalist just called me at 11 o'clock at night with information that could cost me the job I've spent 9 years building, and that information came from someone in your world, and I'm sitting here in a torn dress that someone tore off my body in public, and—" She stopped. She made herself stop. Not because she was wrong, but because she was in a ballroom with 270 people who had already witnessed more of Amara Brooks tonight than she had ever intended to give a room full of strangers. Her voice, when it came back, was quiet. "I need to think." "Okay," Lucien said. "I need to think without you looking at me like that." He looked away. She stared at the table. at her water glass, at the centerpiece flowers that were starting to wilt imperceptibly at the edges, because cut flowers always started dying the second you put them in water, and most people didn't notice because the process was slow enough to mistake for vitality. Danny Reese. The name sat in her chest like something she'd swallowed wrong. She had met Danny Reese once, at a benefit auction 14 months ago, for approximately 40 minutes. He had been charming in the specific way of men who had learned charm as a professional skill, and he had introduced her to Lucien as the woman who outbid me on the Hopper lithograph, which was true, and she had laughed because it was funny, and Lucien had looked at her when she laughed with exactly the expression she'd seen on his face 3 minutes ago, the one she still couldn't name. And that had been the beginning. One introduction, 40 minutes, a benefit auction for a children's literacy foundation. She had never seen Danny Reese again. She hadn't known, at the time, that he had a federal file. She had found out later, 6 months into knowing Lucien, when she'd started asking questions that she needed answers to. And Lucien had told her the truth about Danny, which was that he was a man who existed on the perimeter of many things without being cleanly inside any of them, which was a description Amara had recognized as careful and had accepted as honest if incomplete. She had accepted it because she was already in love with Lucien by then, and because the truth about a person is rarely the whole truth, and because she had made a decision, clear-eyed, deliberate, not naive, that this was the man she was choosing. She had made that decision on her own terms, and now someone was going to put it in a newspaper, framed in the way that made her look like a woman who hadn't known what she was choosing, or worse, like a woman who had known and chosen it anyway for reasons that had nothing to do with love. Ms. Brooks. The voice came from behind her right shoulder. Male. Smooth in the professional way, the way of someone who had decided before approaching that the interaction was going to be controlled. She turned. The man standing behind her was someone she didn't recognize. Mid-40s, expensive suit, the particular posture of someone accustomed to delivering information people didn't want. "I apologize for interrupting," he said, in a way that communicated he was not, especially, apologizing. "My name is Jonathan Kress. I'm General Counsel for Sterling Capital Group." He glanced briefly at Lucien. A professional acknowledgement, not quite respect, not quite challenge, and then back to Amara. "I've been asked by Mr. Sterling to speak with you regarding the incident this evening and the legal implications of—" "No," Lucien said. Kress turned to him slowly. "Mr. Moretti, I understand this is a sensitive—" She said she needed to think. Lucien's voice was completely flat. "Come back in 20 minutes. Kress looked at Amara, as if seeking a different answer from a different face. Amara said, 20 minutes. He left. His departure was smooth and professionally unhurried in a way that communicated objection without quite being objection. Patricia, who had maintained her pointed not listening for the past 4 minutes, said, "Sterling's sending lawyers to her table. That's either very bad or very good." "Both," Lucien said. "Helpful," Patricia said dryly. Amara looked at the older woman. Patricia's face was its professional face, measured, assessing, the face she'd probably worn on the bench for 20 years. But underneath it, in the set of her mouth, was something that Amara recognized as genuine anger. Not performed anger, not the social display of being offended on someone else's behalf. Real anger, directed at herself. "You stayed," Amara said. Patricia looked at her. "I did." "You didn't have to." "No." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I've been in courtrooms for 31 years. I've watched a lot of people make a lot of choices under pressure. And I sat at this table and I didn't move when I should have moved, and no amount of staying now changes that, but I'm staying anyway because—" She paused. "Because a woman I'd been talking to for 20 minutes was being humiliated, and I froze. And I'm 67 years old and I don't have a good excuse for that, and I'm not going to pretend I do." Amara looked at her. "Thank you," she said, quietly, meaning it. Patricia nodded once, meaning she'd heard it but wasn't going to make something out of it. The 20 minutes passed the way 20 minutes pass when you don't want them to, both fast and slow, in the specific way of time that is moving towards something you need to prepare for, but can't fully prepare for because you don't yet have all the information. Amara used them. She called her department head, Dr. Elaine Chow, from the anteroom she'd gone back to, alone this time, or as alone as anyone got when Lucien Moretti was standing outside the door. The call went to voicemail, which was expected at 11:30 at night. She left a message that was precise and calm and gave Elaine the facts in the order she would need to have them. The event, the incident with Victoria Sterling, the phone call from the journalist, the name Danny Reese. She hung up and sat for a moment with the phone in her hands. Then she called her sister Janelle. Janelle answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been awake, which meant she'd already seen something. Amara. Janelle's voice had that particular frequency, not panicked, but moving fast toward the edge of panic and holding itself back by force of will. I've been trying to reach you for… How many? Amara asked. The photos are everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. There's a video, Amara. Someone got the whole thing on video. Amara closed her eyes. The dress, Janelle said. The tearing. And then… Her voice shifted. Then the part where he walks in. That part's everywhere too. It's… People are losing their minds over it. The comments are… What are people saying? About you? Most people are on your side. The way you stood there, the way you held yourself, people are calling you… Janelle stopped. They're calling you incredible. Amara, the way you just stood there. What are they saying about him? A beat. Some people know who he is, and some people are starting to figure it out. Another beat. And some people are already asking questions about who you are and how you two are connected, and… I know, Amara said. A journalist called me. Silence. Janelle? Amara opened her eyes. I need you to go to Mama's tonight. What? Why? I don't know exactly what's coming tomorrow, but I know it's going to be a lot, and I don't want Mama watching the news by herself. Go stay with her tonight. Amara, you're scaring me. I know. I'm a little scared too. She said it plainly, without drama, because it was true, and Janelle would know if she lied, and neither of them had time for that right now. But I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. I just need you to go to Mama. A long pause. Then, okay. Thank you. She hung up and sat in the anteroom for 30 more seconds, doing nothing, which was something she did rarely and only when necessary. The deliberate pause before movement, the moment of not deciding before the deciding. Then she stood up, smoothed Lucien's jacket around her shoulders, and went back out into the corridor. He was where she'd left him. He'd been standing outside the door the entire time she was on the phone, and she knew it without having to look. Tell me about Caruso, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Now? Yes. Now. He didn't argue. Vincent Caruso. He's been with me for 8 years. He manages the communication side of operations. Anything that needs to happen quietly, without a paper trail. And you texted him tonight. Yes. What did you tell him to do? Lucien met her eyes. I told him to find out who else in this building has a relationship with Sterling that I can use. Use? Yes. To do what? To ensure that what happens to Marcus Sterling's business interests is comprehensive. He said it without apology. Not just the contracts I control directly, the full network. Amara looked at him. And Caruso made calls. Yes. And one of those calls went somewhere it shouldn't have. Lucien's jaw tightened slightly. That's what I'm going to find out. How? By talking to Caruso. When? Tonight, after we leave. She studied his face. Is it possible Caruso did it deliberately? The leak to the journalist? The question landed in the air between them with the specific weight of a thing that could not be unsaid. She watched Lucien's face go through something. Not shock. Lucien Moretti did not do shock the way regular people did shock, but a rapid internal reckoning that moved through his eyes in the span of 2 seconds before his expression settled. It's possible, he said. The honesty of it was worse than denial would have been. Why would he, she asked. Because not everyone in my organization has been happy about you. He said it flat and direct, without softening it. I told you that 8 months ago. He had. She had filed it in the place where she stored things she couldn't fully act on at the time. The things you know but can't do anything about yet. She had told herself it was manageable. She had told herself that the people around Lucien would come around, or at the very least would not move against her openly, because moving against her openly meant moving against Lucien, and no one in their right mind did that. She had underestimated the creativity of people who were angry enough. So the night I get publicly humiliated, she said slowly, becomes the night someone in your circle decides to use me as a liability against you. Or against you directly, Lucien said, to push you out. She stood with that for a moment. Then Jonathan Kress, Sterling Capital's general counsel, reappeared at the end of the corridor. He was exactly on time, which told her something about the kind of lawyer he was. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "when you're ready." They went back to the anteroom. Kress brought a colleague, a younger woman named Harris, who had a laptop and a legal pad, and the efficient, minimal expression of someone there to take notes and not to form opinions. Marcus Sterling came in himself. He hadn't sent a proxy. He sat across from Amara and put his hands on the table, folded, and looked at her with the expression of a man who has burned something down and is now sitting in the smoke. "I want to know what it will take," he said. Amara looked at him. "For what?" "For you to understand that what happened tonight was not who I am or who I want my family to be." He paused. "For whatever path forward looks like." "With respect, Mr. Sterling," Amara said, "I'm not here to decide what your family is or isn't. I'm not a judge. I know that. And I'm not going to negotiate anything tonight. I need to sleep. I need to talk to my own counsel. And I need to find out what's being published about me in the morning before I can think clearly about what comes after that." Marcus's eyes moved briefly to Lucien, who was standing against the wall to Amara's left, then back. "The journalist," Marcus said. "Dana Riles." Amara went still. "She works for the Sentinel," Marcus continued. "The Sentinel has been running pieces on my business for 6 months, targeted pieces. Someone has been feeding them information." He looked at his hands. "I don't know if tonight was opportunistic or planned, but I want you to know that whatever is in that story tomorrow morning, whatever they say about you or about your connection to Mr. Moretti, I will be making a statement of my own tomorrow afternoon. And my statement will be about what I witnessed tonight. About you. About my daughter's behavior. About this event." Amara studied him. "Why?" He looked up. "Because it's the right thing to do." "You didn't do the right thing 90 minutes ago." The sentence landed without cruelty, just fact. Marcus Sterling absorbed it the way you absorb things that are true and owed to you. "No, I didn't." "What changed?" He was quiet for a moment. "I saw you come back into the room." She didn't respond. "I watched you walk back in with what my daughter had done to you still visible, and you sat back down. And I've been in business for 30 years, and I've watched a lot of people make decisions under pressure, and what you did was not—" He stopped, pressed his lips together. "It wasn't nothing, what that took. I know what that took, and I sat at that table and did nothing while it was happening, and—" "Mr. Sterling," Amara's voice was quiet. "I appreciate that, genuinely, but right now I need to deal with what's coming tomorrow, and I can't process your feelings about tonight and my own at the same time." A brief silence. "Of course," he said. Kress produced a card and slid it across the table to her. "My direct line. For anything you need, at any hour." She picked it up. They left the Meridian at 12:47 in the morning. Amara had not expected the photographers. She had known, intellectually, that the photos were already circulating, that the video was already spreading, that the name Amara Brooks was already attached to the name Lucien Moretti in the machinery of whatever story was being built tonight. She had known all of this in the abstract, cellular way of someone processing information too fast for it to fully land. The cameras outside the hotel were real in a way the abstract knowing had not been. There were 6 of them, maybe 8. She didn't count. She was looking down, her hand on Lucien's arm, Lucien's jacket still around her shoulders. And the lights were immediate and aggressive, and she had never been photographed outside anything in her life. And the instinct to stop and shield her face was powerful and wrong, and she overrode it by focusing on the car door that was being held open by a man she didn't know. She got in. Lucien got in beside her. The door closed. The car moved. She sat very still for a moment. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm determining that," she said. He didn't push. Outside the tinted windows, the city moved past. New York at 1 in the morning, which was its own specific world, neither the city of daytime purpose nor the city of late-night abandon, but something in between, something watchful. She looked at it and thought about her apartment, about her students, about the lesson plan she had halfway finished for Monday that was still open in a tab on her laptop at home, about how normal and specific and concrete that was, and how very far away it felt from the inside of this car. I need to ask you something, she said. Okay, and I need you to answer me without calculating first. Just whatever the true answer is, I need that one. He looked at her. All right. The people in your organization who aren't happy about me. She turned to face him. How serious is it? He held her gaze. Serious enough that I've been managing it. Managing it how? By making it clear that you're not a liability, that you're not going anywhere, that anyone who has a problem with you has a problem with me. And did that work? A beat. For most of them. Not Caruso. He said nothing, which was its own answer. How long have you known? She asked. I've suspected for about 3 months. His voice was even. Not about tonight specifically, about where his loyalties were drifting. She stared at him. 3 months. Yes. And you didn't... She stopped, started again. You kept him in his position. I was building a case. You move too fast against someone like Caruso, you lose the information before you understand the full picture. And tonight he called a journalist and told them how we met. She heard her own voice going flat in the way it went flat when she was very angry, but was processing the anger rather than releasing it. And you were texting him from the table while I had my hand on your phone, while I was asking you to wait. Lucien was quiet. You texted Caruso, she said, who you've suspected for 3 months of being disloyal. You texted him from a ballroom where I'd just been humiliated and told him to start making calls. And he made calls. And one of those calls was to a journalist. I don't know yet that it was Caruso specifically who... Lucien. Her voice was sharp. One word. Don't. He stopped. Don't manage me, she said. Don't give me the version with the contingencies and the uncertainties. I'm not a deposition. Give me the answer. He looked at her for a long moment. I think it was Caruso, he said. Yes. The car moved through a yellow light. The city outside went by. Somewhere ahead of them, her apartment was waiting with its halfway finished lesson plan and its normal-sized problems. You put me in danger tonight, she said. I know. Not Victoria, not the dress, you. The text you sent from that table, the mobilization you started before you asked me a single thing about what I wanted, that's what put my job at risk, my name in a newspaper, my career. He didn't argue. There was nothing to argue. I need you to understand something, she said. I chose you. I'm saying that clearly. I chose you, knowing who you are, knowing what that means. But choosing you doesn't mean agreeing to be managed. It doesn't mean agreeing to be a variable in your calculations that you don't tell me about. I know. Do you? She turned in the seat to face him more directly. Because there is a person in your organization who has been working against me for 3 months, and you knew, and you kept it from me. And tonight that person used the story of how we fell in love to make me look like a liability in a newspaper. The words hit something in his face. She saw it. The specific impact of the story of how we fell in love. The thing underneath the operational framing of the problem. Amara, I'm not leaving, she said quickly. I want to be clear about that. I'm not in this car having a goodbye conversation. She saw the something in his face shift and made sure he heard her. But I'm in this car having a conversation about what changes. Because something has to change. The car pulled to a stop. She looked out the window. They were outside her building. She looked back at him. Caruso, she said. Tonight. Yes. And then you tell me everything. Not the managed version. Not the version you've decided I can handle. Everything. He held her gaze. Everything. She reached for the door handle, then stopped. What was the rest of the text? She asked. The one you sent from the table. There was more than what you told me. He was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. I told him to find out who at the Sentinel has been taking sterling money, he said, and to find out how deep it goes. She processed that. And did he? Yes, Lucien said. He sent me the answer 20 minutes ago. Her hand was still on the door handle. How deep? Lucien looked at her with the particular expression of someone about to give someone else information that will change the texture of everything that comes after it. Deep enough, he said, that the journalist who called you tonight wasn't just fishing, she was sent. And the person who sent her isn't connected to Sterling. Amara's hand tightened on the door handle. Then who? She asked. And Lucien said a name she recognized, a name that came from inside her own life. Not his, Not the ballroom, not the world of Sterling Capital or Moretti operations or any of the machinery she'd been navigating for the past 3 hours. A name from before. A name she would never, in any version of tonight she had imagined, have expected to hear in this car. The city was very quiet outside the window. Her hand didn't move. "Say that again?" she said. He said it again. And the ground, which she had been holding together through 18 months of careful, deliberate, clear-eyed choosing, shifted in a way she could feel in her chest, in her legs, in the specific place behind her sternum, where the things you cannot absorb all at once tend to land first before they spread. And Amara Brooks, who had stood in a torn dress in a room of 300 silent people and not broken, felt something break now, quietly and completely. In the back seat of a car on a street she'd lived on for 6 years, because the name Lucien had said was the name of the one person she had never, not once, thought to protect herself from. The name was Marcus Webb. Amara sat with it for 10 seconds that felt like 10 minutes. Marcus Webb, her former mentor. The man who had written her recommendation letter for the Hargrove Academy position 9 years ago. The man who had sat across from her at a coffee shop in the West Village and told her she was the most gifted educator he'd encountered in 30 years of working in schools. The man who had called her on her first day at Hargrove and said they're lucky to have you, not the other way around. The man who had introduced her to Danny Reese, not Lucien, not the benefit auction. She had told herself the story so many times, the benefit auction, the Hopper lithograph, Danny Reese's charm, and easy introductions, that she had stopped examining the layer underneath it. The layer that said, "How did you end up at that auction in the first place?" Marcus Webb had given her the ticket. "Why?" she said. Her voice was very quiet. "Why would Marcus—" "I don't know the full picture yet." Lucien's voice was careful in the way it got careful when he was managing information in real time. "What Caruso found is a money connection. Webb has been receiving payments from a shell company that traces back to an entity that has been funding negative coverage of my operations for the past 2 years. The payments started 14 months ago. 14 months ago. 1 month after she and Lucien had started seeing each other. "He's been paid," she said. "To what? Watch me?" "To keep a line of access. To you, through your trust in him, and to position information when the right moment came." She thought about the benefit auction ticket, about every time she'd mentioned Lucien to Marcus in the cautious, careful way she'd mentioned him. Not his name, not specifics, just someone I'm seeing, someone serious. And Marcus had been warm and encouraging and had asked gentle, interested questions that she had answered because he was Marcus, and she had trusted him for 9 years. She had told him things, not operational things, not anything she understood to be sensitive. She had been careful about that, always careful, because she wasn't naive about who Lucien was. But the texture of things, how they'd met, Danny Reese's name, the benefit auction, enough. "Get out of the car," she said. Lucien went still. "Amara, I'm not ending this conversation. I just need to be outside right now." She was already pushing the door open. "I need air." She got out onto the sidewalk. The November night was cold enough to be a physical fact, and she stood on the pavement outside her building and breathed it in, once, twice, 3 times. With Lucien's jacket still around her shoulders and the torn dress underneath it, and her heels on concrete she'd walked on 1,000 times that felt completely unfamiliar. Lucien got out of the car. He stood a few feet from her, not crowding, not retreating. "Tell me who sent the money," she said without turning around. "I don't know yet. The shell company it's going to take time to fully trace." "Guess?" "Amara, you have a guess." She turned her around. "You always have a guess, and you're usually right. And I am standing on a sidewalk at 1 in the morning outside my own building, and I need you to stop protecting me from information and start trusting me with it." He held her gaze for a long moment. "There's a man named Devereaux," he said. "Theodore Devereaux. He runs an investment consortium out of Chicago. We've had conflicts over territory. Not physical territory, financial. He's been trying to push into markets I control for 3 years, and he's been losing, and men like Devereaux don't absorb losses without redirecting them. He wants to hurt you. He wants to make me bleed somewhere I can't immediately defend." Lucien's voice was even. "He can't get to me directly. He's been trying to build a federal case, feeding information to the wrong prosecutors for 2 years. Nothing that's stuck. So he goes lateral. Through me. Through you. She stood with that, with the specific, clarifying weight of understanding that her humiliation tonight had not been entirely accidental. Not Victoria's cruelty. That was its own thing. That was a spoiled woman's vanity and too much champagne. But the journalist. The timing. The fact that Dana Riles had called within an hour of the incident, armed with specific information. Devereaux knew about the gala, she said. He knew I was planning to go. Someone in my circle told him. A pause. Probably Caruso. So Caruso and Devereaux. Possibly. Or Caruso is just the leak and Devereaux has other people. I don't know the full structure yet. She looked at him. What do you know? I know that tonight was the beginning of something, not the end of it. The story in the morning is the first move. Webb's access to you is the second. There will be a third. What's the third? He met her eyes. That's what I need to find out tonight. She went inside. She didn't ask him to come up. She didn't tell him not to. She just said, I'll call you, and went through the lobby door and into the elevator and up to the 7th floor and into her apartment, which was exactly as she'd left it. Coat on the hook by the door, lesson plan open on the laptop on the kitchen table. The half-eaten bag of crackers she'd had at 9 o'clock when she was getting ready because she hadn't eaten dinner. She sat down at the kitchen table in her torn dress and Lucien's jacket and looked at the lesson plan on the screen. Monday. American Literature, Grade 11. The Great Gatsby. Chapter 7. The scene where everything that has been building finally tears open. She laughed, small and dark and entirely without humor. Then she took Lucien's jacket off and folded it over the back of the chair and went to change. She didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with her tea, made it out of pure muscle memory, the specific routine of kettle and mug, and the particular tea that she'd been drinking since college. And she went through her phone with the systematic attention of someone conducting an inventory. The photos were everywhere. Janelle had not been exaggerating. The video, shot by someone with a decent camera phone from an angle that captured the full width of the ballroom floor, was on 3 platforms and had been shared tens of thousands of times. The quality was good enough to see Victoria's face, good enough to see the deliberateness of the grab, good enough to see the 30-second pause before anyone in the surrounding crowd even shifted in their chair. And then Lucien's entrance, the jacket, the hand. The comments were... She stopped reading the comments after 4 minutes because the comments, even the supportive ones, reduced her to a symbol, and she was tired of being a symbol tonight when she was also just a woman sitting in her kitchen at 1:30 in the morning in yoga pants and a university sweatshirt. She opened her email. 17 unread messages in the last 2 hours from addresses she didn't recognize. She filed them without reading. Then she found the one from Dana Riles, a follow-up email sent 40 minutes after the call, for the record, with specific questions attached. She read it twice. Then she forwarded it to the number on Jonathan Kress's card with a one-line note, FYI. No response sent. Then she sat and thought about Marcus Webb. She called him at 2 in the morning. She didn't plan to. She had told herself she would wait until daylight, would think it through, would talk to an attorney first. But at 2 in the morning, she was sitting at her kitchen table, and she picked up her phone and called him, and she was not surprised when he answered on the 4th ring, because Marcus Webb had always been a light sleeper. Amara. His voice was warm. Immediately, fully warm, with no sleep-fogged confusion. Like he'd been expecting the call. That was the moment she knew, with a certainty that dropped through her like cold water, that Lucien was right. I need to ask you something, she said. Of course. What's going on? I saw the photos. The ticket, she said. A pause. I'm sorry? The benefit auction, 14 months ago, Children's Literacy Foundation. You gave me the ticket. Another pause, slightly longer. Yes. A colleague couldn't attend. I thought of you. You always supported. Who was the colleague? Amara, what is this? Who was the colleague, Marcus? The silence this time was different. It had a different texture. Not the silence of someone searching their memory, but the silence of someone calculating. In 31 years of knowing Marcus Webb, she had never once heard him calculate before answering her. He was the kind of man who answered. That was the quality she had trusted most about him. His immediate, unguarded responses that felt like the truth, because they always came before he had time to dress them. This was dressed. I think, he said slowly, you should get some sleep, and we should talk tomorrow when... Were you paid to introduce me to Danny Reese? The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. Amara, yes or no? It's not that simple. Yes or no. She heard him breathe, heard the specific quality of breath that a person takes when they are deciding how much of a truth they can give in place of the whole one. There were people, he said finally, who had an interest in your connection to in you becoming connected to Moretti's world. Yes. The kitchen was very quiet. You knew who Lucien was before I met him, she said. I knew of him. You sent me to meet him. I gave you an opportunity that I thought, don't. Her voice came out harder than she intended, harder than she'd heard from herself in a long time. Don't tell me what you thought it would be for me. Don't dress it up. You were paid to put me in a room with Lucien Moretti. It's not... Amara, I want you to understand, did you know what they planned to do with the access? Did you know that someone was going to use our relationship against him? I didn't know the specifics, but you knew there were specifics. No answer, which was an answer. She sat very still. Her tea had gone cold. She hadn't noticed. I mentored you for 9 years, Marcus said, and his voice had shifted. The professional warmth was gone, and underneath it was something more exposed, and she realized more frightened. I got you that job at Hargrove. I wrote letters for you. I made calls for you. I know what you did for me, she said. I've been grateful for it every day for 9 years. And you used it. Amara, you used the trust I had in you to put me in a position I didn't understand I was in. For money. From people who wanted to use my relationship to hurt someone I love. Her voice was steady. It cost her everything she had left after tonight to keep it steady. I need you to tell me who gave you the money, Marcus. I need the name. A long pause. I can't, he said. Can't or won't? Both. He said it very quietly. Amara, I'm telling you this because whatever you think of me right now, I still care about what happens to you. The people involved in this are not people you want me to name to you. They are not people you want to go near. I made a mistake getting involved, and I have been trying for months to find a way out of it. And give me the name, Marcus. I can't, because you're afraid of them. Yes. The word came out stripped bare. Yes. I'm afraid of them. I'm a 64-year-old retired educator who got involved in something I didn't fully understand, and now I can't... He stopped. His voice had gone ragged at the edges. I can't just hand you a name and expect there to be no consequence for that. She sat with that, with the specific, exhausting complexity of a man who had wronged her and was also genuinely frightened, of a mentor who had used her trust and was also telling the truth about being in over his head. She had expected, in the 4 minutes since she'd called him, to feel a clean and manageable anger. What she felt instead was something more complicated and harder to carry. Okay, she said. Okay? I'm not going to push you for the name tonight. She pressed her fingers against her forehead. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. Whatever you think you're protecting yourself from by not talking, the people who will be asking you these questions tomorrow won't give you the option I'm giving you right now. A pause. What people? You know whose jacket I was wearing in those photos. Another silence. Get a lawyer, she said. Tonight if you can. Tell them everything. Don't wait to see how the morning story lands. She paused. That's the only advice I have for you. She hung up. She sat at the kitchen table for a while without moving. Then she picked up the phone and texted Lucien. Devereaux. It's Devereaux. Marcus confirmed without confirming. He's scared. The response came back in 40 seconds. I know. I'm already moving. She stared at that last sentence. Already moving, at 2:15 in the morning. She tried not to think about what that meant specifically. The mechanics of it, the people involved, the things that happened in the city at 2:15 in the morning when Lucien Moretti decided he was moving. She closed her phone and made fresh tea and did not sleep. The Sentinel published at 6:15. She read it at her kitchen table with the second pot of tea and the particular clarity of someone who has not slept but has moved past the point where exhaustion feels like exhaustion and into the territory where everything becomes very sharp and very specific. The story was built well. She hated that she had to acknowledge it. It was competently, surgically constructed. It led with the video, which was embedded and already had 4 million views. It described the incident with Victoria in precise, measured language that communicated outrage while maintaining the fiction of journalistic neutrality. Then it turned. The woman at the center of last night's incident, Amara Brooks, a literature teacher at the prestigious Hargrove Academy on the Upper East Side, has been in a relationship with Lucien Moretti, known in federal circles as the operating head of the Moretti crime family, for approximately 18 months. According to sources with knowledge of the relationship, the introduction was facilitated through mutual associate Daniel Reese, who was named in a 2023 federal investigation into financial fraud. She read it through once. Then again, it was not technically false. That was the construction of it. Every sentence was either verifiable or attributed to sources in a way that gave it shelter. The framing did the work that the facts alone wouldn't do. Built the architecture of implication, the suggestion that Amara Brooks was either naive or complicit, a woman who had either stumbled into something she didn't understand or had sought it out. Her phone started ringing at 6:20. The first call was from Dr. Elaine Chow, her department head at Hargrove. She answered. Amara. Elaine's voice had the controlled, careful quality of someone managing multiple things at once. I got your voicemail last night. I've read the piece. Okay. I want you to know that I think what happened to you at that event was appalling, and I want you to know that's my position as a person, not just as your department head. Thank you, Elaine. But, a pause. The headmaster has called a meeting this morning. He's read the piece and Amara, I want to be honest with you. He's concerned about the optics. The optics, she repeated. Your relationship with Mr. Moretti, in the context of the school's public profile and the morality clause in your contract. I know my contract. I know you do. Elaine's voice was careful. The meeting is at 9. The headmaster would like you to attend. She looked at the clock on the kitchen wall. It was 6:22. 9 o'clock was 2 hours and 38 minutes away. I'll be there, she said. She hung up and called Lucien. He answered before the first ring finished. She knew he hadn't slept either. The school, she said. 9 o'clock meeting. I know, Elaine Chow called the school at 6:12. A pause. How do you know about Elaine? She just called me. Ah, a beat. What did she say? That the headmaster is concerned about optics and wants a meeting. She stood up from the kitchen table. What do you know that I don't? Devereaux reached out to 2 members of Hargrove's board of directors last week, before the gala, before any of this. She stopped moving. He's been building this for longer than one night, Lucien said. The gala was the trigger, not the plan. The plan has been in motion for at least 6 weeks. 6 weeks? She said it slowly. He planned for 6 weeks to use you to create a public narrative that would pressure the board into terminating your contract, which creates a public story about who I involved myself with, which feeds into the federal case he's been trying to build for 2 years. Lucien's voice was even. He was in the space now where he went operational, where the emotion moved somewhere internal, and what remained was the focused, systematic intelligence that she had once, in a different context, found fascinating and now found both necessary and frightening. He needs a human cost, something visible, something that makes what I do feel personal to regular people, not just to prosecutors. And I'm the human cost. That was the plan. Was, she said. Past tense. Yes. Because? Because Devereaux's attorney received a call from my attorney 40 minutes ago with documentation that connects the shell company to Devereaux's personal accounts. That documentation will be in the hands of a federal prosecutor by 8 o'clock. She stood very still. How did you get that documentation? I had it, he said. I've been building a case against Devereaux for 8 months. I was waiting for the right moment to move. 8 months. Her voice went flat. You've been building a case against the man who was targeting me for 8 months. Yes. While not telling me someone was targeting me. The silence was 2 seconds. I was trying to protect you, he said. I know. She said it without softening it. And look how that went. She heard him breathe. Go to the meeting, he said. I need 2 hours. For what? To finish this. She showered. She dressed. She put on the specific armor of professional clothing, the blazer, the heels that were different heels from last night, because last night's heels were in the corner of her bedroom, and she couldn't look at them. She did her hair and her makeup with the focused, procedural attention of someone who understands that appearance is a communication and needs to control the message. At 7:40, her doorbell rang. She opened it expecting the delivery she'd ordered, coffee, because the tea had run out around 6:45 and she needed something stronger. It was not the delivery. It was Victoria Sterling. Amara stood in her doorway and looked at Marcus Sterling's daughter, who was standing in the corridor of a 7th-floor apartment building on the Upper West Side at 7:40 in the morning, wearing the same clothes she'd worn the night before, with the specific appearance of someone who had also not slept and had, unlike Amara, spent the no-sleep hours in a worse place. Her makeup was gone. Her hair was down and unbrushed. She looked, stripped of the ballroom and the champagne and the social armor of her father's event, very young, which was not the same as innocent, but it was something. "How did you get my address?" Amara said. Not aggressively, just factually. "My father's people." Victoria's voice was hoarse. Can I? She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I know you don't owe me anything. I know I know." Amara looked at her for a long moment, then she stepped back and opened the door wider. Victoria came in. She stood in the middle of Amara's living room looking at the bookshelves and the student essays stacked on the coffee table and the coat on the hook by the door, and she looked like someone in a house they don't understand the language of. "My father he's ending my access to Sterling Capital," she said, "to the business, completely. He's transferring control of my trust to an independent manager." She looked at the floor. "He told me this morning that he spent 26 years mistaking indulgence for love, and he's not doing it anymore." Amara said nothing. I know that doesn't fix anything." Victoria looked up. Her eyes were red, genuinely red, not the performed redness of someone staging remorse. "I know what I did. Last night. I know what it was. I've been sitting in my hotel room for 6 hours knowing what it was." "What was it?" Amara asked. Victoria blinked. "Tell me," Amara said. "What was it?" A pause. "It was cruelty. Deliberate cruelty. To someone who hadn't done anything to me except—" She stopped. "Except what?" "Except look like she didn't care what I thought of her." The words came out rough, like they cost something real. And that made me furious. And I'm starting to understand that says something about me that I need to deal with. Amara studied her. "That's honest," she said finally. "I'm trying to be." Victoria's jaw was tight. "I'm not good at this. I'm not—" She made a frustrated gesture. "I came here because I needed to say it to your face. Not through lawyers or statements or my father's PR people. I needed to—" She stopped again. "Say it then," Amara said. Victoria Sterling looked at Amara Brooks in the morning light of a small apartment on the Upper West Side and said, without the champagne and without the audience and without any of the machinery of last night's performance, "I'm sorry. What I did was wrong, completely wrong, and I'm sorry." The room was very quiet. Amara stood with it, stood with the specific, complicated weight of accepting an apology that you have not decided yet whether you believe, from a person who hurt you in front of 300 people, in your living room at 7:40 in the morning before you have had enough coffee and before you have slept and before you have faced a meeting at 9 o'clock that may end your career. "I hear you," she said. Not "I forgive you," not "thank you," not the absolution Victoria had come here needing, just "I hear you." Victoria nodded. Her throat moved. "Is there—" She stopped. "Is there anything I can do?" "Yes," Amara said. "There is." She looked at her directly. "The board at Hargrove Academy. 2 members were contacted last week by a man named Theodore Devereaux. I need those conversations documented. Dates, what was said, any written communication. If your father's people can get that information before 9 o'clock. Victoria's eyes widened slightly. The shift from personal reckoning to operational request had been fast enough to catch her off guard. "I can call him right now," she said. "Please," Amara said. Victoria had her phone out before Amara finished the sentence. At 8:53, Amara Brooks walked through the front entrance of the Hargrove Academy on the Upper East Side. In her bag, Jonathan Kress's card. A printed copy of the documentation Lucien's attorney had sent the federal prosecutor. screenshots of the shell company connections, and a 7-page statement written in the 3 hours between 2 and 5 in the morning that she had not shared with anyone yet. At her side, arriving simultaneously through a separate entrance as they had agreed, was Patricia, the retired federal judge who had sat at a table in the Meridian Hotel ballroom and not moved and had been paying that debt ever since, who had answered her phone at 6:30 in the morning without hesitation. At 9:01, Amara sat in the headmaster's office across a long conference table from Dr. Richard Hargrove, no relation, despite the name. She had always found that quietly funny, and 2 members of the board of directors, and Elaine Chow, and a school attorney named Brenner, who had the specific posture of someone there to manage an outcome that had already been decided. "Ms. Brooks," Hargrove said. He was in his 60s, gray-haired, the kind of institutional authority that wore itself quietly. "We appreciate you coming in. I want to say at the outset that what happened to you last evening was—" "Before we discuss last evening," Amara said, "I'd like to put some documents on the table." Hargrove stopped. She took the printed documentation from her bag and placed it in the center of the table. Then she looked at the 2 board members, Caldwell and Marsh. She had learned their names at 7:15 from Marcus Sterling's people via Victoria's phone call. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "Mr. Marsh, I believe both of you received communication last week from a man named Theodore Devereaux regarding my employment here." Caldwell's face did something that was not quite a wince, but was adjacent to one. "That documentation," Amara continued, nodding at the papers, "connects Theodore Devereaux to a coordinated campaign designed to use my termination from this institution as part of a broader effort to damage someone I'm in a relationship with. It also connects that campaign to payments made to a third party for the purpose of facilitating my introduction to that person 18 months ago." The room was very still. Brenner, the school attorney, said carefully, "Ms. Brooks, I'm not sure this is the appropriate venue to—" "A federal prosecutor has this documentation as of 8 o'clock this morning," Amara said. "So the question of appropriate venue may be decided for us fairly quickly." She looked at Hargrove. "I want to be clear about what I am and am not saying. I am not threatening this institution. I am not here to litigate my personal life. I am here because I have spent 9 years at this school and I love this work, and I am not willing to be removed from it because someone with money and a multi-year grudge decided I was a useful pressure point." She paused. "I am willing to answer any question this board has about my relationship with Lucien Moretti. Directly, honestly, without lawyers present if you prefer. What I will not do is accept termination based on a morality clause invoked because someone spent 6 weeks building a campaign to make that invocation look necessary." Hargrove looked at the documents, then at Caldwell, then at Marsh. Marsh said, very quietly, to Caldwell, "Richard mentioned Devereaux to me. I told him it felt wrong. I told you, this isn't—" Caldwell began. "I told you," Marsh said again, and the repetition was not loud, but it was final. Patricia, who had been sitting silently to Amara's left, put her reading glasses on and leaned forward to look at the documentation with the focused attention of someone who has spent decades evaluating evidence. "Clean chain of custody," she said, as if to herself. "Whoever put this together knew what they were doing." Brenner looked at her. "And you are?" "Patricia Osei," she said, "retired federal judge, Second Circuit." She looked at Brenner over her glasses. "I'm here as a personal friend, not as counsel, but I can tell you what this documentation means if that would be helpful." The room rearranged itself. Not the chairs, not the people. The room itself, the atmosphere of it, the understood hierarchy of who had come into this meeting with what and what it was worth. Hargrove looked at Amara. She looked back at him. And underneath the conference table, out of sight, her hands were pressed flat against her thighs, and she could feel her pulse in her fingertips, and her jaw was aching from the tension she'd been holding in it since 1 in the morning, and she was running on no sleep, and cold tea, and the specific, stubborn determination of a woman who had been humiliated in public last night and was not going to be dismantled in private this morning. She didn't let any of that show. "Tell me what you need from me," she said to Hargrove, "to make a decision that's actually about my value to this school, and I'll give it to you." Hargrove looked at the documentation again, looked at his board members, looked at Patricia Osei, retired federal judge, Second Circuit, who had her reading glasses on and was making notes in the margin of a legal pad with the unhurried confidence of someone who has all the time in the world and is going to use it correctly. He opened his mouth. And in that breath of silence before he spoke, before whatever the next sentence was going to be, before the room came down on one side or the other of the thing that Amara had spent the last 7 hours building toward, her phone buzzed once on the table. She didn't pick it up, but she could see the screen. It was Lucien. One sentence. Caruso is talking. Devereaux is done. But there's something else. Call me before that meeting ends. She looked at the message for 1 second. Then she looked up at Richard Hargrove, and her expression did not change, and she did not reach for her phone because whatever Lucien had found, whatever something else meant at 9:04 in the morning after the longest night of her life, it was going to have to wait 4 more minutes. She needed this room first. Go ahead, Dr. Hargrove, she said. Richard Hargrove looked at the documentation for a long time, not skimming, reading. The kind of reading that a careful man does when he understands that what's on the page in front of him has consequences that extend beyond the room he's sitting in, and he wants to be certain he's understood it correctly before he opens his mouth and commits to a position. The conference room was very quiet. Outside the windows, the Upper East Side was conducting its 9 o'clock business. Taxis, school drop-offs, the specific purposeful movement of a city neighborhood that ran on routine. In here, no one moved. Brenner, the school attorney, had stopped making notes. I was watching Hargrove the way attorneys watch clients when they're waiting to find out what kind of problem they're actually dealing with. Caldwell had his hands flat on the table and was looking at them. Marsh had pushed his copy of the documentation toward Patricia, who had accepted it without comment and was reading it with the same focused attention she'd given the first copy. Elaine Chow was looking at Amara with an expression that said several things at once. I'm sorry, I didn't know. I should have moved faster. I'm here. Amara held her phone in her lap under the table. Lucien's message sat on the screen where she'd left it. Something else. She pressed the phone face down against her thigh and kept her eyes on Hargrove. Finally, Hargrove set the documents down, took his reading glasses off, pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose in a gesture that was not performed. It was the gesture of a tired man arriving at a decision he wishes had not been necessary. Miss Brooks, he said. Yes. I owe you an apology. The room shifted. Brenner's pen moved slightly on his legal pad. Caldwell looked up. Not for this morning specifically, Hargrove continued, though this morning has been poorly handled and I take responsibility for that. But for the call I received from Theodore Devereaux 8 days ago, which I did not immediately report to the full board, and which I allowed to sit in my thinking about your employment without telling you it existed. Amara held very still. He called you directly, she said. Yes. What did he say? Hargrove's jaw moved slightly. He said he had concerns about an employee of this institution whose personal associations posed a reputational risk to the school. He said he had documentation he was prepared to share with the press if we didn't proactively address the situation. A pause. He used the word proactively. I remember specifically because I found it distasteful even at the time. But you didn't dismiss it. No. Hargrove met her eyes. I didn't. And that was wrong. 9 years of your work at this school should have been the answer to that phone call, and it wasn't, and I don't have an excuse for that I'm proud of. The room absorbed this. Amara looked at him for a long moment. She was reading him the way she'd learned to read people, not for what they said, but for the thing underneath it, the quality of the honesty being offered. Whether it was being offered because it was right or because it was strategically necessary. She thought it was both, which made it neither complete nor worthless. I need to make a call, she said. 5 minutes. Hargrove nodded. She stood, picked up her phone, and walked to the corridor outside the conference room. The door closed behind her. She leaned against the wall, not dramatically, just finding something solid, and called Lucien. He answered immediately. Tell me, she said. Caruso is talking to my attorney. He confirmed Devereaux. He also gave us a third name. A pause. Webb wasn't the only person Devereaux put close to you. She waited. Your building super, Lucien said. Man named Terrence. He's been on Devereaux's payroll for 4 months. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds, then opened them. What has he been doing? Reporting your patterns. When you leave, when you come back, who visits? Devereaux wanted a complete picture of your life in case he needed to escalate beyond the press. A pause. It wasn't physical threat, It was leverage building, in case the newspaper story wasn't enough to move the board. She stood in the corridor of the Hargrove Academy and looked at the framed photographs on the wall. Class photos, decades of them, rows of students in uniforms going back to 1962. All those young faces that had moved through this building and out into the world, and felt the specific bone-level exhaustion of a person who has been a target without knowing it. "How long have you known about Terrence?" she asked. The pause before his answer was 1 second too long. "Lucien. I found out 6 weeks ago," he said. "I had him removed from access to your floor last month. I told the building management there was a maintenance concern. You had him removed without telling me someone had been watching me. I handled it." "You handled it," she repeated, "like you handled Caruso, like you handled Devereaux's documentation for 8 months. You handled it without telling me I was in a situation that needed handling. I didn't want you to be afraid?" Her voice was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. "Lucien, I have been afraid this morning. I have been afraid since 1 in the morning, and I was afraid alone because you decided what I could handle." She paused. "We will talk about this. Fully. Not now, but we will." "I know," he said. "Is there anything else? Anything else you've been handling without telling me?" A beat. She appreciated that he took the question seriously instead of reflexively answering no. "Nothing active," he said finally. "Nothing that poses a current risk." "That's not the same as nothing." "No," he said. "It's not." She looked at the class photos. At 1987, 1993, 2001, rows of faces she'd never know. "Devereaux," she said. "What happens to him?" "The federal prosecutor has the documentation. The case that I've been building and the case they've been building intersect enough that they'll move on him within the week. Financial crimes, conspiracy, witness intimidation, the last part specifically because of what he did to Webb, which is its own situation." A pause. "He'll be occupied for a long time, Amara. He won't be looking at you." "And Caruso?" "Caruso is no longer my problem to handle. He made himself the federal government's problem when he took Devereaux's money." Lucien's voice was even. "He understands that." She thought about what that meant. Not the legal implications, which were clear enough, but the human ones. 8 years. Whatever Lucien had built with Caruso over 8 years, the specific trust of working closely with someone in circumstances that required absolute trust, and the way that trust had been quietly, systematically hollowed out, while Lucien either didn't know or suspected and managed it alone. She thought, "We are more alike than either of us wants to admit." "Go back in the meeting," he said. "Finish it." "I will." She paused. "Lucien." "Yeah." "After today. After all of it." She chose the words carefully. "We need a different arrangement. Not between us. I don't mean that. But the way information moves between us needs to change. I can't be someone you protect from your life. I chose your life. I chose it knowing. But you have to let me actually live in it." A silence. "I know," he said. And then, quieter. "I've known for a while. I've been afraid to." She hadn't expected that. Not the honesty of it, that specific and unguarded kind. "We'll figure it out," she said. She went back inside. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes. What emerged from those 40 minutes was not a clean resolution. Nothing about this was clean, and she was done expecting clean. But it was an honest one. Hargrove agreed, with Brenner's visibly reluctant documentation, that the morality clause could not be invoked in circumstances where the reporting had been manufactured and directed by an external party with demonstrable malicious intent. He committed to a written statement to that effect, to be shared with the full board by end of day. Caldwell said very little. Marsh said he was sorry and meant it. Elaine Chow walked out with Amara afterward and put a hand briefly on her arm in the corridor. "Your job is yours," she said. "It was always yours. I'm sorry it took this morning to say it clearly." "Thank you," Amara said. "Are you okay?" Amara looked at her. The question was genuine, not the professional version of the question, not the liability-conscious version. Just a woman asking another woman, in a corridor at 10:15 in the morning, if she was okay. "Not yet," Amara said. "But I'm going to be." Elaine nodded. She understood the difference. Patricia was waiting in the lobby. She had her coat on and her bag in hand, and the composed, unsentimental expression of a woman who had done the thing she came to do and was ready to move on. "You didn't need me," Patricia said. "I needed you," Amara said. "I needed to not be alone in that room." Patricia looked at her. "That's not the same as needing my credentials." "No," Amara agreed. "It's not." Something in Patricia's expression shifted, not softening exactly, but arriving somewhere. "What you did in there, the documentation, the preparation, the way you controlled the frame of that meeting before Hargrove could set his own." She paused. "Who taught you to do that?" Amara almost said Lucien. But that wasn't entirely true. "I've been in rooms that weren't built for me my whole life," she said. "You learn to build your own door." Patricia studied her for a moment. Then she put on her gloves and said, "Get some sleep," and walked out of the Hargrove Academy into the Upper East Side morning. Marcus Webb called at 11:30. She was in a car, not Lucien's car, her own car, the car service she'd taken because she needed to be moving without being in anyone's specific space, and the city was passing outside the windows in the way the city passed when you were too tired to actually see it. She answered. "I got a lawyer," he said. No preamble. "Last night. He's been with me since 6 this morning." "Good," she said. "He says I need to cooperate with the federal investigators. He says the documentation that Moretti's people have is—" He stopped. "He says it's comprehensive." "It is." A long silence. "Amara." His voice had the specific exhausted quality of a person who has been awake for 30 hours and has spent most of them sitting with what they've done. "I want to tell you something. And I want you to understand that I'm not saying it because my lawyer told me to or because I think it changes anything." She waited. "When I gave you that ticket," he said, "I told myself it was an opportunity, that I was opening a door for you, that even if the people who paid me had their own motives, the outcome for you could still be genuine, real, that you could meet someone real through a door that was opened for the wrong reason." A pause. "I told myself that for 14 months. And I believed it enough to keep going to sleep at night." "But you knew," she said. "You knew what they wanted from the access. Not the specifics, I told you that honestly, but I knew—" He stopped. "I knew it wasn't clean, and I wanted the money, and I told myself a story about it, and I used your trust to do it." A long pause. "I'm 64 years old, and I used a 20-year relationship, and I called it something else, and I don't know how to—" His voice broke slightly on the last word. Just slightly. "I don't know how to live with that yet." She listened to him breathe. She thought about the 9 years, the recommendation letter, the phone call on her first day, the coffee shop in the West Village, all the conversations she'd had with him about her students, her work, the things that mattered to her, conversations in which she'd been entirely unguarded because she'd believed she was safe to be unguarded. She thought about the fact that Lucien Moretti, a man the world considered dangerous, had told her the truth every time she'd asked for it, including the truths that cost him, including this morning at 1 a.m. on a street he'd driven her to at the end of the worst night of her life. And Marcus Webb, who had a university office and 30 years of educational service and her complete, uncomplicated trust, had spent 14 months lying to her about the door through which she'd walked into the most important relationship of her life. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry. I know that too." She watched the city outside the window. "Marcus, cooperate fully. Don't protect Devereaux. Don't protect anyone. Tell them everything you know." "I will. And when this is over, the legal part of it, however long that takes, I don't know what we are after that. I don't know if we're anything. I'm not saying that as a punishment. I'm saying it because I genuinely don't know yet, and I'm not going to tell you something that isn't true." A pause. "That's fair," he said. "Yeah," she said. "It is." She hung up and looked out the window and felt something that was not forgiveness yet, but was in the same territory. Something that acknowledged the complexity of a person without excusing what they'd done. That allowed for the 64-year-old man making a bad choice out of money and rationalization to exist alongside the mentor who had genuinely believed in her for 9 years, without needing to collapse those two things into one clean verdict. She didn't have a clean verdict. She wasn't sure she'd ever have one. She was learning that clean verdicts were a story you told yourself about people, and real people were more expensive than that. She slept from 2 in the afternoon until 6 in the morning. 14 hours with the specific completeness of a body that has been running past its limits and has decided without consultation to shut down for maintenance. She woke up disoriented. The light was wrong, the angle of it, and then recognized her own ceiling and lay still for a moment, just existing in the normalness of it. Her bedroom, her ceiling, her apartment that a man named Terrence had been reporting the patterns of for 4 months. She had called the building management the night before she slept. She had not explained why. She had said she wanted a new superintendent assigned to her floor, and she wanted it done before the weekend. The building manager had not argued. She didn't know if he'd been told something or if the specificity of her request had communicated enough on its own. She got up and made coffee. The Sentinel piece had been up for 36 hours by then. In that time, 3 other outlets had published pieces that told the story differently, told the story of the video, of the ballroom, of a woman who had stood with her dress torn in front of 300 people and not broken. 2 of those pieces mentioned Lucien Moretti. Neither of them framed him the way the Sentinel had framed him. One of them quoted Patricia Osei, retired federal judge, Second Circuit, who had given a brief statement saying she had been present at the event and had witnessed behavior she found deeply troubling, and that the woman at the center of it had conducted herself with dignity she would not soon forget. Patricia hadn't told Amara she was making that statement. Amara found out the same way everyone else did. She called Patricia. "You could have warned me," she said. "Yes," Patricia agreed. "Why didn't you?" "Because you would have asked me not to, and I needed to do it." A pause. "I sat at that table, Amara. I told you I've been living with that. This was the only specific thing I could do." Amara stood at her kitchen window with her coffee. The street below was conducting its morning routine. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Patricia said. "It should have been someone closer to you, someone in that room who knew you. The fact that it was a stranger you'd spoken to for 20 minutes is the part that should embarrass that room, not you." Amara didn't have an answer to that. Sometimes there wasn't one. She saw Lucien 4 days later. Not because they'd been avoiding each other, they'd talked on the phone every day, sometimes twice. The careful extended conversations of people who have unfinished business and know it, and are being deliberate about the order in which they finish it. She needed the 4 days to sleep, to sit in her apartment without performing composure, to go back to her classroom on Monday and stand in front of her students and teach Chapter 7 of The Great Gatsby about what happens when the thing you've been building toward finally tears itself open. She did that. She stood in front of 32 grade 11 students and taught the chapter. One student in the back, a girl named Sophia, who was 15 and had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, said, "It's like he already knew it was going to fall apart, and he kept building anyway." Amara looked at her. "Why do you think he kept building?" Sophia thought about it. Because stopping felt like admitting he was wrong about everything, and that was worse than losing. The class was quiet for a moment. "What do you think?" Sophia asked her. Amara considered it, the honest version of the answer. "I think sometimes you keep building because the thing you're building is real," she said. "Even if the structure around it isn't, even if the ground under it isn't solid, the thing itself can still be real." Sophia thought about this. "But it still falls apart." "Some of it," Amara said, "not all of it." She met Lucien at a restaurant in the West Village. Not a place he owned or had associations with. She had asked for somewhere neutral, somewhere neither of them had a history with, and he had found a small Italian place on a side street that had been open for 40 years and had no televisions and no music and tables far enough apart that the people at the next one weren't in your conversation. He was already there when she arrived. He stood when she came in, an automatic gesture, not performed, just the person he was. And she looked at him across the small restaurant and thought, as she had thought at various points in the past 4 days while sleeping and teaching and sitting at her kitchen window with coffee, "This is still real." The ground under it was not what she'd thought it was, but the thing itself was real. She sat down. For a few minutes they talked about nothing in particular, the restaurant, the menu, the fact that the city had dropped 10 degrees since the gala, and she had not been prepared for that. Normal conversation, the kind that surrounds the important kind, the way silence surrounds difficult words. Then she set her menu down. "Tell me everything," she said. He looked at her. "Not the filtered version," she said. "Not what you've decided I can handle. Everything about your world that touches my life. The people who have access to information about me. The people who have concerns about my presence. What you do at 2 in the morning when you're being careful. I'm not asking you to stop being who you are. I'm asking you to stop deciding what I get to know about being with who you are. Lucien set his menu down too. That's going to be uncomfortable, he said. I know. There are things, he paused. There are things I protect you from because if something happened to you, Amara, he stopped. And for the first time in the months she'd known him, she saw him not manage the something that moved through his face. He let it move. Let her see it. If something happened to you because of information you had, because of proximity to my world, then I would have chosen that proximity knowing the risk, she said. Lucien, I'm a grown woman who has made a clear-eyed decision about who she loves. The most dangerous thing in my life right now is not your world. It's the blind spots your protection creates. She held his eyes. I almost lost my job this week because you'd been managing a threat to me for months without telling me. I was alone in a kitchen at 1 in the morning because I didn't have the information to be anywhere else. That's what protection costs. He sat with that. She could see him working through it, not arguing, not defending, actually working through it in the way he worked through things that mattered, the methodical internal reckoning that she'd watched enough times to recognize. Okay, he said finally. Okay. There are 3 people in my organization who still have concerns about you. Not operationally, not threats, not Caruso level, but people who would use information about you if they found a better deal than loyalty. He said it flat and direct, no softening. I've been watching them. I will continue to watch them, but I want you to know they exist. She nodded. What are their names? He told her. She didn't write them down. She filed them in the specific place where she stored information she needed to carry carefully, and she held his gaze. What else? She said. He talked for a long time. Not everything. She wasn't naive enough to think one dinner conversation could cover 8 years of a complicated life. But enough. The real shape of things, not the curated shape. The people he trusted and why, the people he didn't trust and why, the structure of what he'd built and the places where the structure was imperfect and he knew it. She listened. Asked questions when she had them. Let the silences be silences instead of filling them. At some point, the food arrived. They ate. The restaurant did its quiet 40-year-old business around them. Devereaux, she said. The federal case. How long? His attorney filed for a delay on arraignment. He'll get it. These things take time. Lucien picked up his wine glass. But he's done in this city. The financial structure he built, the thing he used to pressure people to buy compliance, that's exposed now. Nobody buys a compromised infrastructure. He knows that. He'll try to rebuild somewhere else. Probably. That's not my problem, as long as it's not my city. She looked at him. Is that enough for you? He was quiet for a moment. A year ago, no. He set the glass down. Tonight? Yeah. It's enough. She understood what he meant. What had changed between a year ago and tonight was not strategy or leverage or the geography of power. It was sitting in the back of a car on her street at 2 in the morning and saying a name and watching something break in the face of a woman who had stood unfractured through everything else. He had learned something from that. She wasn't sure she could have told him what it was in words, but she could see the learning in how he'd answered the question. Webb, she said. His attorney called mine yesterday. He's cooperating fully. The information he has about the shell company structure is, Lucien paused, significant, more than I expected. He was more involved than he admitted to me. Yes. She absorbed that. The additional layer of it, not just the 14 months of access selling, but more. She didn't ask how much more yet. She'd ask eventually, when she was ready to have that inventory. He was scared, she said. He was. He's still scared. Lucien looked at her. That doesn't change what he did. No, she agreed. It doesn't. She thought about what Sophia had said in class, about building something you know might fall apart because stopping felt worse. She thought about Marcus Webb at 64, a retired educator in a coffee shop in the West Village, who had believed in her genuinely and used that genuine belief as cover for something he told himself a story about until the story ran out. She thought, you can love someone and still be the worst thing that happens to them. She thought, you can be loved and still be used. She thought, these things being true doesn't tell you what to do next. You have to figure that out yourself. Victoria, she said. Lucien's expression did something minimal. Her father told me, Amara continued, that he cut off her access to the business, to her trust. I know. That's not... I didn't want that. She looked at him. I want to be clear about that. What happened at the gala was cruel and deliberate, and I have every right to be angry about it. But a 26-year-old woman losing her financial independence because of something she did while she was drunk at her father's party... It wasn't about the party, Lucien said. Marcus Sterling has been making that choice for 26 years, or not making it. I made it now because something finally made the cost visible. He paused. That's not on you. I know that intellectually. But? She looked at the table, at the glass of water she'd been holding intermittently for the past hour. She came to my apartment the next morning. He went very still. You didn't tell me that. I know. She looked up. I'm telling you now. He absorbed that. The small, specific return of information withheld, the parallel she was drawing without drawing it directly. What did she say? He asked. That she was sorry. That she knew what it was. Not an accident, not the champagne, not a bad moment. She knew it was cruelty, and she said so. Amara set the water glass down. And I asked her to get information from her father's people about the board members Devereaux had contacted. She did it in 10 minutes. Lucien was quiet. She's not a good person yet, Amara said, but she might become one. I don't know. That's not my project. She paused. I just didn't want her destroyed. I don't think destruction makes anyone better. I think it just makes them harder. He looked at her for a long moment. You're a more complicated person than people think, he said. So are you, she said. That's why we work. Marcus Sterling released his statement that afternoon, the day after the meeting at Hargrove. It ran in 12 outlets by evening. It was not a PR statement, which surprised people. It didn't have the architecture of managed image, no crisis communications firm's fingerprints, no carefully neutral language designed to say everything and commit to nothing. It was direct in a way that Marcus Sterling had not been publicly direct in 30 years of business. He named what his daughter had done. He named his own failure to intervene. He named the silence of the room, not the other attendees specifically, but the condition of it, the climate that allowed a woman to be publicly humiliated because the powerful people around her calculated that silence was the safer choice. He said, I built a career on the idea that strength is measured by what you build. I'm rethinking that. I think strength is measured by what you're willing to stand in front of. He announced 3 initiatives: funding for anti-discrimination training in corporate environments, a mentorship program for women of color in business, a scholarship in Amara Brooks' name at the institution where she worked. He had not asked Amara's permission for the last one, which she would call him about. She would also tell him, when she called, that the scholarship could stay if he changed the name. Not her name, a name that meant something broader, something about the actual lesson, not the person who'd been standing in the middle of it. He agreed. The scholarship was eventually named for the idea that the most dangerous mistake you can make is measuring someone's worth by what they look like when they walk into a room. It was not a poetic name. Amara didn't care. Poetic names were for people who cared about how things looked. She cared about what they did. 3 months later, on a Thursday evening in February, Amara was in her classroom after school finishing the feedback on a set of student essays when her phone rang. It was Janelle. Turn on the news, Janelle said. I'm grading. Amara, turn on the news. She turned it on. Theodore Devereaux had been indicted on 17 counts. The federal case, the one that had been building for 2 years, that Lucien had been feeding documentation into for 8 months, that Caruso's cooperation had finally cemented, had moved. The financial crimes were extensive. The conspiracy charges were more extensive. The witness intimidation charge connected to Marcus Webb was the one that carried the heaviest potential sentence. She watched the news segment. The Attorney General's spokesperson used the word comprehensive 3 times. She turned the television off. She sat in her classroom for a moment in the quiet that schools had after hours. The specific, particular quiet of a space built for noise that was temporarily still. The student essays were spread across her desk. The fluorescent light above her flickered twice the way it had been flickering since October, despite 3 maintenance requests. She picked up her pen and went back to grading. She was on the 4th essay when her door opened and Lucien leaned against the frame. He was in a coat she hadn't seen before, gray, good wool, and he had the expression he wore when he'd done something and was waiting to see if she knew. You saw, she said. Not a question. I saw. How does it feel? She asked. He thought about it. Not performing the thinking, actually thinking about it, which was a thing she'd noticed him doing more in the 3 months since the gala. Taking questions seriously enough to actually answer them. Like something that was owed got paid, he said. Not clean, but settled. She nodded. Good. He came in, looked at the student essays spread across her desk, at the flickering fluorescent light. You've been trying to get that fixed since October, he said. They keep sending the wrong person. I know someone. Lucien. A legitimate electrician, he said. I'm not... He made a gesture that said, I'm not making this into something. She looked at him for a moment, then, send them Tuesday. I'll be here. He sat down in the chair beside her desk, the student chair, the small one, and folded himself into it in the ungainly way a tall man in a good coat sat in furniture designed for a 15-year-old, and he looked not entirely comfortable and not entirely willing to acknowledge it and completely present. She turned back to her essays. He sat. The room was quiet in the way rooms are quiet, when two people who have been through something are finally somewhere that doesn't require either of them to be anything other than what they are. No audience, no performance, no assessment of damage or building of cases or management of information. Just two imperfect people in a classroom after hours, one of them grading essays and one of them sitting in an inadequate chair, with the city moving on outside the windows, and everything that had happened between them since that night already becoming the history that would underlie whatever came next. After a while, Amara looked up. Chapter 7, she said. He looked at her. I'm sorry? The Great Gatsby. I've been teaching Chapter 7, the one where everything tears open. She set her pen down. One of my students said the other day that Gatsby kept building even when he knew it was going to fall apart, because stopping felt worse than losing. Lucien looked at her steadily. What did you say? He asked. I said sometimes you keep building because the thing you're building is real, even when everything around it is wrong. She paused. Even when the ground under it isn't solid. He looked at her for a long time. Outside the windows, February moved through the city. Taxis and corner stores and the particular blue of a cold evening coming down over the skyline. People going home. People starting nights. The city conducting its enormous, indifferent, infinitely specific business. In a classroom on the Upper East Side, a woman picked up her pen and went back to her grading. And a man who had spent his entire adult life in rooms that required him to be the most dangerous presence in them sat in a chair designed for a 15-year-old and was, for the first time in longer than he could accurately measure, exactly nowhere he needed to be except here. The fluorescent light flickered